Chapter 13-14. The harvest in Jianghe County alone is enough to feed a prefecture. I've only heard of the good harvest in Hu County, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, I know that the rumors are true. Huang Song was busy harvesting the autumn grain. Jiang Pengji was full of malice toward him. Anyone who was not blind could see that he was well aware of it. It had been 2 days since the autumn grain was harvested. The amount of grain harvested surprised him. Hu County used to be a place that made people pale at the mere mention of it. Who knew that after Lu Shi's reorganization, it would immediately turn waste into treasure? Whether it was peace or war, grain was a currency that was harder than gold. With grain in hand, one would not panic. However, what Huang Song lacked the most was grain. Fortunately, by the time the autumn harvest arrived, Jianghe County would be able to harvest 2 to 3 million don of new rice. Because the war had started early, the people nearby had been evacuated. No one had taken care of the fields for a few months. Fortunately, Jianghe County had a good geographical location. This year, the heavens had given them face. The harvest could barely reach the average of previous years. On the first day, they had harvested 250,000 don of autumn grain. When Huang Song heard the number, he felt the beginning of the exclamation. To prevent any undue delay, Qing Jing divided his men into 4 groups and implemented a 4-round handover method. They harvested the autumn grain day and night. They had to be anxious. According to the scouts, Jiang Pengji had frequently mobilized her troops in the past 2 days. It was as if she was sharpening her knives to kill livestock. If they did not hurry to harvest the grain now, how could they resist Jiang Pengji's crazy attacks while harvesting the grain after the war started? Qing Jing and the others in Huang Song's tent were so busy that their feet did not stop moving. The candles in the tent were not extinguished all night. They continued to be busy when the sky brightened. Qing Jing did not have time to fix his appearance due to his busy schedule. The green in his eyes became darker and his eyes were bloodshot. He was working hard, but so were the others. For example, Yuan Chong, who was on guard and patrolling, was so tired that he fell asleep every day. His strong body had also become thinner. Huang Song's forces were like a huge machine that ran at high speed. Every part of it was overloaded for a long time. In the words of the audience in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji was like the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. They had to squeeze out their potential. Qing Jing had never felt that time passed so slowly. According to his calculations and plans, the autumn harvest would end in half a month. But today was only the 2nd day. They still had to be on tenterhooks and be on edge for 13 days. He finally knew what it meant to live like a year. Just as he finished counting the next day's harvest, he heard the sound of galloping horses in the distance. The sound of the horses' hooves was hurried and nervous. Qing Jing immediately walked out of the tent and saw the scout heading straight for the main tent, so he hurried over. The scout who was investigating the enemy's military situation suddenly pulled on the reins and fell off the horse before he could even catch his breath. His helmet was already drenched in sweat. "There's an urgent report from the front line, my lord." The soldiers guarding the main tent did not dare to be negligent and immediately reported this to Huang Song. When Qing Jing arrived, Huang Song was angrily throwing the bamboo slips on the ground. His eyes were wide open and his chest was heaving violently. His footsteps paused, and he bent down to pick up the palm-sized bamboo slip. He read it at a glance. The bamboo slip was not big, but it contained a lot of information. After reading it, Qing Jing understood why Huang Song was so angry. There were 3 pieces of news written on the bamboo slip. Each one was terrible and extremely unfavorable to Huang Song. First, there was a change in the battle line in Wanzhou, which had been in a stalemate for several months. Qiguan Rang switched from defense to offense. He pretended to fall for Feng Zhu's trap. He pretended to build a plank road on the surface but secretly attacked Qinsong, turning Feng Zhu's army around. The army under Feng Zhu's command was defeated. They had no choice but to retreat 20 miles. Their morale was low. Second, Feng Jin was firmly guarding Tsang and Chen prefectures. He had gathered 100,000 troops and pointed their swords at Haozhou. The general guarding Haozhou had suffered many losses and was in a state of emergency. Third, Jiang Pengji had trained her troops and deployed them several times. She had consolidated 120,000 troops to guard Hu County. They could attack Zhanghe County at any time. When Qing Jing read this, he secretly added another piece of bad news to his mind. Fourth, Meng Heng and the others had been stationed at the Sanshan Valley and had not retreated. Once Jiang Pengji attacked, they would take advantage of the situation and attack from both sides. Each piece of news could bring great psychological pressure to a person, not to mention that they were all handed to Huang Song at the same time. Huang Song only angrily threw the bamboo slips on the ground. This was already considered self-restraint. Qing Jing took a few careful glances and keenly noticed that something was not quite right. For example, the second piece of news. Feng Jin only had 30,000 to 40,000 troops. How could there be 100,000? In reality, Feng Jin did not have many troops, but he included the remnants of Huang Song's troops that he had captured. Feng Jin used 1 or 2 months to properly train these captured and deserted troops. When they attacked Haozhou, they would be pushed to the front line as cannon fodder. In troubled times, human life was the most valuable. Using cannon fodder to grind the enemy's head and fight for space for the elites was a very normal operation. 70 to 80% of Feng Jin's 100,000 troops were fake, but the 120,000 elites that Jiang Pengji had brought over were different. They were real elites. A total of 120,000 elites stared at Huang Song. Huang Song suddenly had the illusion that the outcome was already decided. Perhaps it was not an illusion. Huang Song fiercely suppressed the thoughts in his heart. Before the outcome was truly known, he could not admit defeat. Moreover, he could not show weakness in front of his own people. My lord? Qing Jing's voice interrupted Huang Song's wild thoughts. Huang Song looked up at Qing Jing and said, Yumo, do you have any countermeasures for the current situation? Qing Jing said, Wanzhou has been under attack for a long time. There's no point in continuing the stalemate. It's better to let Huaijie withdraw his troops and return to defend Haozhou. He had some understanding of Qiguanrang. The latter had always been a patient person. It was fine if he did not make a move, but once he did, it was bound to be a fatal blow. Qiguanrang had endured for several months. He had stubbornly defended Wanzhou and refused to go to war. One could imagine how much anger he had suppressed in his heart. Feng Ju was the best target for him to vent his anger. Qiguanrang had changed his strategy at this time and switched from defense to offense. It was obvious that he had grasped Huang Song's weakness, so he took the opportunity to attack. It was impossible for Feng Ju to break through Wanzhou's defense line in a short time, but Jiang Pengji could break through Zhanghe County in a short time. Qiguanrang no longer had any worries. Naturally, he would not continue to endure and defend. He took the initiative to attack Feng Ju. Compared to Qiguanrang, Qing Jing knew Feng Ju better. Unlike Feng Jin, who was calm and thorough, Feng Ju was still very young. It was not that he was young, but that he had a young heart. Because of his outstanding talent, Feng Ju learned everything quickly. He did not need to study hard to surpass countless peers of his age. Others could only look up to him. Excessive smoothness would foster an excessive temper. Therefore, Feng Ju could not tolerate his failure. It was even more difficult for him to accept that he would fail. Feng Ju and Qiguanrang were in a stalemate at the front line of Wanzhou. It might be because Feng Ju's stubborn temper had flared up. If he were to give up at this time and choose to return to Hejin County dejectedly to defend Haozhou, Feng Ju would explode in anger. Thinking of this, Qing Jing felt a headache coming on. Chapter 13-15. Huang Song's expression flickered incessantly. He seemed to be struggling violently. Sending Feng Zhu back to guard Haozhou could stabilize the situation there, but this was not what Huang Song wanted. Yimo, I know your suggestion is for stability, but this is not what I want. He rejected it in a low voice. Without waiting for Qingjing to speak, he continued, Lanting has many troops. I'm afraid it will be difficult to defend Zhanghe district. Once we fail, we can only retreat to Hejin County or even Haozhou. In this way, Haozhou will become an isolated island in the sea, facing a situation where we are besieged on all sides. I don't want to be a trapped beast, struggling to survive. The current situation was extremely disadvantageous to Huang Song. He was not confident that he could defeat Jiang Pengji even though he was outnumbered. Although there were many examples in the history books of people outnumbered, the conditions for it to happen were extremely harsh. Under normal circumstances, most people would still be crushed by their opponents using numbers and strength. If Zhanghe district failed, Huang Song would face the situation of defending Haozhou alone. It would truly be a battle of a trapped beast. He was not as arrogant as the sons of aristocratic families, but he had his own temper and dignity. He definitely did not want to fall into such a situation. Qingjing understood and asked Huang Song, My lord, you mean? Huang Song muttered to himself for a while and said solemnly, Order Huijie to bring troops here to rendezvous. If there's enough time, Jiang Pengji would make her move within these 2 days. Huang Song's news would reach Feng Zhu. It would take at least 7 or 8 days for Feng Zhu to bring troops over. Qingjing heard the dejection and despair in his words. At the same time, he was shocked by Huang Song's determination. Huang Song ordered Feng Zhu to bring troops over to rendezvous. He was mentally prepared to determine the outcome in one battle. The two sides faced each other, blocking all paths of retreat. Either Jiang Pengji or Huang Song would die. No matter who lived or died, the end of this battle would be the end of one of them and a new beginning for the other. Qingjing could not say anything against it. After thinking for a long time, he could only sigh and agree. I'll draft up the transfer order now. Huang Song said, Okay. Huang Song's wife, Qi Chaolan, was a strong-minded woman. When her husband went to the front line to fight, she had to follow him from afar with hundreds of guards. She lived nearby to help him do what she could and share his worries. The relationship between the husband and wife improved over time. Thinking of this, Huang Song could not help but smile bitterly. In the past, she had always been worried that Madame Qi would run into danger when she came to the front line. Every time she went out to fight, she would tell her not to follow. But now, she felt that it was also good for her to follow. At least she could see her once, and she wouldn't have to die with regrets. Qi Chaolan looked at him with concern and asked, Why do you look so worried? Huang Song said, Talking about what happened outside will only make Madame worry for nothing. The two of them were not far from each other, but Huang Song had not seen her for almost half a year. He had a lot to say to her. When he wanted to open his mouth, he found it hard to say anything and didn't know what to say. Madame Qi said, Even if you don't tell me, I can guess most of it. In her eyes, Huang Song was an optimistic person. Even if he suffered a setback, he would quickly recover. He didn't like to bring his work home. Even if he had a lot of troubles outside, he would put on a nonchalant attitude in front of his wife and children when he returned home so that his family wouldn't worry. Madame Qi knew him so well, but Huang Song looked so worried this time. It was obviously not a small matter. It was very likely related to his family's life. Huang Song thought about it, then lowered his head and whispered, If I can't give you the highest glory, will you be sad? When he was young, he had suffered enough because of his birth. He had been despised and unfairly because of his birth. He knew what it was like, so he naturally didn't want his children to repeat his life. After getting married and starting a career, Huang Song paid more attention to this point. He didn't want his children to suffer. If it weren't for his good luck and his father-in-law's favor, Huang Song wouldn't have been able to marry Qi Chaolan. She had been wrong to marry him. How could Huang Song bear to let her suffer with him? In the chaos of Dongqing, his ambition grew day by day. When he dreamed at night, he also thought about that supreme position. He wanted Chi Chaolan to share it with him. Madame Chi said with a smile, as long as Lang Jun is still here, even simple tea and simple food can be delicacies. Why should I be sad? She said it so calmly that Huang Song didn't know how to react. Madame Chi said, no matter who wins or loses, you have to be alive. This is the most precious thing to me. No glory or status can be exchanged for it. Huang Song choked and didn't speak for a long time. Madame Chi looked at him, and her heart couldn't help but feel sour. She had accompanied Huang Song from a teenager to a young man, and he was about to enter his 40s. How she wanted to continue to walk with him and meet him until they were old. How can I bear to see you in a difficult situation? Madame Chi sighed. Do whatever you want. She and Huang Song weren't a husband and wife who respected each other, so she didn't want to use herself and their children to restrict Huang Song's choices. Huang Song's throat choked, and he didn't know what to do. His outstretched hands stopped in midair, and after a long while, he wiped away the ice or tears with his fingertips. He said in a low voice, "Don't cry. These tears aren't hanging on your face. They're clearly dripping into your husband's heart." Huang Song and his wife had been married for many years, but he had only seen her eyes turn red once. That was when Meng Zhan proposed to promise a woman from the clan to him as a concubine to win him over. But now, he had made her cry. Huang Song's heart ached so much that he couldn't help but blurt out all kinds of sweet nothings. Not only did Madame Chi not stop, but she cried even harder. She rarely cried, but once she did, her tears would burst like a dam that couldn't be stopped no matter what. Huang Song was quite frightened. Huang Song could only pick her up and coax her as if she were a child, saying a lot of nice things. Your husband isn't a stubborn man. A real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. I will never commit suicide just because I am defeated. You are still so young, and the child is still so young. Without your husband's protection, I will crawl back even if I go to hell. Of course, Huang Song knew that if he was defeated, committing suicide with his sword was the best way to protect his family. But when Chi Chaolan cried so sadly, his rationality collapsed. Besides, your husband may not lose. What if I win? Wouldn't that be a happy ending? Even salted fish had dreams, let alone people. Chi Chaolan's tears had washed away all his despair and decadence, and Huang Song's fighting spirit was high again. He had to pull himself together. The situation wasn't irreparably bad. Huang Song tried his best to coax her for a long time before she stopped crying. That day, the husband and wife spent a long time together. Huang Song woke up before dawn the next day. He thought that he had gotten up very early, but he didn't expect Madame Chi to get up even earlier. Or rather, she hadn't slept at all that night. Madam, take them back to Haozhou and wait for me to go back. She got up and helped Huang Song get dressed. She lowered her head and said, okay. Watching Huang Song leave with his people, his figure gradually becoming a small black dot, her shaky emotions collapsed again. Chapter 13:16. Reporting. The sound of hurried footsteps and a loud report came from outside the tent. Qiguan Rang reacted a beat slower and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" Taking advantage of the fact that he had planned this for a long time, Qiguan Rang suddenly suppressed Feng Ju and caught him off guard. Then, he played along and deceived a wave of enemy troops, forcing Feng Ju to retreat 20 miles. It seemed like a simple and easy victory, but in fact, he had taken a great risk. Qiguan Rang had been thinking about how to maximize the results of the battle for the past 2 days, so much so that he was overworked. His voice was much hoarser than usual. The messenger rushed all the way. His bronze cheeks were dyed red, and there were large beads of sweat on his forehead. He calmed himself down and couldn't help but say happily, "Military counselor, rejoice. The enemy has pulled out their camp and retreated." Pulled out their camp and retreated? Qiguan Rang was stunned for a moment. He suddenly stood up from his seat, and the cloak that was draped over his shoulders slipped off his shoulders and piled up at his feet. He wasn't as happy as the messenger. Instead, his expression was solemn, and his eyes were frighteningly gloomy. The enemy has retreated? When did this happen? Could it be another crafty plot, a trick to deceive the soldiers? Qiguan Rang felt that the few months of fighting with Feng Zhu had exhausted a few years of his lifespan. All kinds of schemes had been continuously planned. If it wasn't him, but someone with a more impetuous temperament, they would have been cheated by Feng Zhu and still counted the money for him. At this moment, Qiguan Rang was most afraid of hearing that Feng Zhu had come to stir up trouble again. It was simply too annoying and impossible to guard against. The messenger said, "Last night at the 4th hour, the lights in the enemy's tent were still burning. This morning, there was no sign of smoke or fire. We were suspicious and sent people to investigate, only to find that the enemy's tent was completely empty. Looking at the time, they should have retreated last night." Qiguan Rang couldn't react for a moment. He wasn't sure if Feng Zhu was really retreating or pretending to retreat to deceive him into sending troops. He couldn't be blamed for overthinking. It was because Feng Zhu had too many past records. Qiguan Rang had no choice but to be cautious. He said, "Send someone to investigate again." Not long after the messenger left, Fu Wang walked in with a displeased expression. He was still wearing the heavy, mighty armor, which made his already tall and burly body look even more sturdy. Coupled with his own imposing manner, he gave off the illusion of being cramped and oppressive just by standing there. "Military advisor, I heard that the enemy has retreated." Fu Wang was a cub raised by a wolf. He had a strong sense of aggression in his bones. Jiang Pengji had made him the commander-in-chief and asked Qiguan Rang to help him defend Wanzhou. He had thought that he would be able to fight a battle to his heart's content. Who would have thought that the military counselor would only defend and not attack? After a few months, he was almost suffocated. It wasn't easy for him to change his strategy and switch from defense to offense, but before he could enjoy it to his heart's content, the enemy had taken the initiative to withdraw their troops. This made him want to spit out a mouthful of blood. What does this feel like? It wasn't easy for him to feel good, but he still had to time it. It was simply inhumane. Qiguan Rang furrowed his brows and said, "That's what it looks like on the surface, but it's hard to tell if it's real or not. If Feng Zhu turns around and attacks us again, it'll be impossible to guard against it." When Fu Wang heard this, his dim eyes lit up again. He flipped over like a salted fish. Unexpectedly, Feng Zhu had really retreated and left without any reluctance. It was impossible for him to turn around and attack them again. Fu Wang anxiously urged the army to stay alert and wait for the enemy's return, but he was disappointed in the end. Is he really retreating? Fu Wang felt even more pained. He had been guarding Wanzhou for so long that mushrooms were about to grow. Yet Feng Zhu just ran away after provoking him. Was he still a man? He was definitely not a man. Qiguan Rang was also surprised. Fu Wang suggested excitedly, "Military advisor, should we send troops to chase after him? It's only been a day since they retreated. If they travel day and night, they'll definitely be able to catch up." Qiguan Rang was frowning as he looked at the sand table. The general direction in which the enemy had retreated was marked on it. "General, what do you think is the reason for Feng Zhu's withdrawal?" Fu Wang was warlike, but he wasn't brainless. He carefully looked at the sand table and pondered the direction in which the enemy had retreated. He could more or less guess the reason. It's time for the autumn harvest. Our Lord has been patient for a long time. It's like an arrow knocked on the bowstring against Huang Song. Fu Wang deliberated and said, "If Feng Zhu's withdrawal isn't fake, he's most likely leading his troops to support Huang Song." "That's not right. What is Huang Song trying to do?" Feng Zhu supporting Huang Song was equivalent to gathering about 80% of his troops in one place. Was he planning to confront the two armies and have a decisive battle? Qiguan Rang pinched his brows and said in a low voice, "If Feng Zhu's withdrawal is true, it should be for this." Fu Wang said worriedly, Huang Song has a lot of troops. I'm afraid there's going to be a tough battle on our lord's side. Military advisor, are we really not going to lead troops to chase and intercept them? If Feng Jue was intercepted, Huang Song would have one less helper. The pressure on Jiang Pengji's side would also be reduced. Qiguan Rang said, if we lead troops to intercept them, what will happen to Wanzhou? Our duty is to ensure that Wanzhou is safe. We can't take any risks. Fu Wang said again, but our lord, Qiguan Rang looked as if he could see through Fu Wang's expression. He carefully analyzed the situation for him. If Huang Song's two armies successfully join forces, they will have a total of 160,000 to 180,000 troops. This is an exaggerated figure. Our lord has about 120,000 troops under her command. If we include General Luoyue's troops, their military strength will be equal to Huang Song's. Our lord has spent a lot of effort and a lot of money to build these troops. Huang Song's chances of winning are only 30% at most. The more Fu Wang listened, the darker his eyes became. He was like a salted fish that had lost its dreams, a small fish stranded on the beach. Qiguan Rang continued, in terms of momentum, Huang Song has suffered repeated blows and is in low spirits. He is far inferior to our lord. His chances of winning are even lower. As long as our lord doesn't make any mistakes and doesn't make any irreparable mistakes, victory is in our hands. He was very reassured about his lord's situation, so Fu Wang should give up on the idea of leading troops to pursue and attack. Fu Wang was speechless. Jiang Pengji did have an advantage over Huang Song, but this advantage could not guarantee victory. Out of respect for Huang Song, she did not do it half-heartedly. As early as when Feng Ju received the secret letter and led his troops to evacuate Wanzhou, Jiang Pengji had already begun to attack Huang Song. Huang Song could only hastily fight while harvesting the autumn rations. Luoyue was unwilling to be left alone in the Sanshan Valley. He responded to his lord's orders and cooperated with her to attack Huang Song. Huang Song could only divide his troops into several waves. Fortunately, the Sanshan Valley was easy to attack and difficult to defend. There was still a natural terrain at the border of Hu County that they could rely on. Although they were somewhat distressed, the situation was still stable and they did not collapse. This was not good news, but it was not bad news either. Huang Song abandoned all distracting thoughts and focused on the war. Yimo, how is the autumn rations harvest going? Qing Jing said, we've collected 50%. According to the original progress, it was at most 30%. But Qing Jing had arranged for the soldiers to rush day and night and repeatedly compress time to barely achieve this efficiency. Huang Song silently calculated in his heart. 50% of the autumn rations would be more than 1.2 million dong, enough for the army to eat. Huang Song said, Zhanghe County is not a long-term place. The longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for us. Zhanghe County itself was not an easy place to defend, not to mention that the enemy was attacking from two sides at the same time. Chapter 13-17. I have the same idea. Qing Jing said, my lord, please look here. Qing Jing understood Huang Song's plan. Defending Zhanghe district was not a good idea. The greatest value of this place was in the grain. Now that they had harvested 50% of the grain, it was enough for the army to eat for the next few months. This battle would not last long, so it was meaningless to continue harvesting the remaining autumn grain. Huang Song planned to withdraw his troops and leave Zhanghe district. Coincidentally, Qing Jing had a good place to go. Where? Huang Song looked in the direction Qing Jing was pointing. What is this place? Qing Jing said, this place is called Changye. Changye? Huang Song was surprised. It sounds familiar, but I can't remember where I've seen it before. Qing Jing said, Changye used to be under the jurisdiction of Hu County during the Xia dynasty. Later on, strange phenomena occurred, causing the people here to migrate. As time went by, there was no one here. When Dongqing was founded, it was separated from Hu County when the prefectures and counties were redivided. According to Qingjing, this place was a secluded place that everyone avoided. Huang Song thought for a long time but could not remember where he had heard of this place. Qingjing continued, "My lord, you must have forgotten that Changye was once the burial place of someone." His reminder immediately reminded Huang Song of something written in a random collection. The first prime minister of the Xia dynasty was buried here. What strange phenomena happened in Changye? Huang Song asked. Qingjing said, in the last years of the Xia dynasty, there was an extremely serious flood in Changye. The rain poured for a whole month and the sky was filled with thunder and lightning. When the flood subsided, the people discovered that the tombs near Changye had been dug up. After some investigation, they found out that it was foreign thieves. They heard that a prime minister was resting here. The thieves suspected that there was something valuable buried in the tomb, so they took advantage of the flood to dig up the tomb. Huang Song naturally knew who the prime minister was. It was the controversial Prime Minister Huangfu. Qingjing continued, the thieves searched the prime minister's tomb but did not find anything valuable buried with him. The coffin in the center of the tomb was washed out by the rain. After the thieves left, the coffin was discovered by a woodcutter. The woodcutter used a hatchet to chop the coffin into firewood and carried it home. The headless corpse was exposed in the wilderness. From then on, thunderstorms frequently occurred in Changye, and the people did not dare to go out at night. More than one commoner said that when they went out during a thunderstorm, they would always see an army camp with 1,000,000 soldiers outside the town. Not only were there ghost soldiers and ghost generals, but the tents were also lit with ghost fire. The common people were afraid that the ghost soldiers would harm them, so they moved away from Changye one after another. Over time, Changye became an uninhabited ghost land. Huang Song said awkwardly, "Isn't this a ghost story?" He was a little scared of ghosts. Qingjing said, "It is indeed a story." After all, Huang Song had asked him what kind of place Changye was, and Qingjing had brought out the story. Huang Song, scaring people in broad daylight. Huang Song carefully examined the terrain of Changye and had to admit that Qingjing's choice was correct. However, Huang Song teased, "What if the ghost soldiers jump out and interfere when I'm fighting against Lanting?" Qingjing glanced at his lord as if he was looking at an idiot. Was this something he should be concerned about now? Reality proved that a ghost story was ultimately just a story. Changye would become uninhabited because there had been an outbreak of a plague. The source of the plague was a flood that washed a large number of floating corpses into Changye. The corpses polluted the water and caused the common people to fall ill. More than half of the common people died, and the remaining half moved away. Huang Song and Qingjing reached a consensus, but they were strongly opposed by the others in the tent. Yuan Xian's eldest son, Yuan Kuang, was one of the most vehement opponents. "My lord, why do we have to retreat? What Changye? That place is too open, and it's not conducive for our army to fight." Yuan Kuang really did not understand. What was so bad about staying in Zhanghe County? At least there was enough food. What was the point of going to Changye? Without the terrain to rely on, how could they fight a war? Because Huang Song had punished Yuan Kuang's status was not as good as before. He was not a meticulous person, so he was only pushed out by others to stand out. His purpose was to bear Huang Song's anger, and at the same time, to sound out Huang Song's intentions. Huang Song glanced at Yuan Kuang and did not speak. Instead, it was Qingjing who explained patiently, but it was unknown whether he was telling Yuan Kuang or the others. Qingjing said, "Zhanghe County is not a place that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. Lu Shi has sufficient troops. If he uses the strategy of besieging us and cutting off our food and water, how will we respond? This is the first reason. The second reason is that Lu Shi's troops will be split into two. They will attack from both sides and deal with them at the same time. As time goes on, we will still be at a disadvantage. Rather than sinking deeper into this predicament, it's better to break free as soon as possible and fight to the death. If Huang Song wanted to stay in Jianghe County, it would be more convenient for him to return to Haozhou. Huang Song's goal was for the two armies to confront each other and decide the winner in one go. Changye was a good place for a decisive battle. They did not have many advantages that they could use, and neither did the enemy. If they were to compare, Jiangpengji would be at a greater disadvantage in the Battle of Changye. Huang Song had taken over the autumn grain in Jianghe County, so he did not have the burden of the grain line. Jiangpengji had to spare extra effort to protect the grain line. Yuan Kuang's personality was like that of his late father, Yuan Xian, but he was not as experienced as Yuan Xian and did not have the right to take advantage of his seniority. Huang Song would not change his mind because of the opposition of others as long as there were no problems with his principles. Yuan Kuang was dissatisfied, but he was no match for Jiangpengji. He could only suppress his anger. Everyone saw Huang Song's determination and had no choice but to agree. At that moment, someone asked, "The autumn harvest is not over yet. What should we do with the grain in the fields? Leave it for the enemy to collect?" Huang Song said indifferently, "Set it on fire and burn it." If he did not have it, others could not have it either. That night, a huge fire broke out in Jianghe County. The intensity of the fire was frightening. Jiangpengji was woken up by someone. She was wearing pajamas and a large cloak. "Is Jianghe County on fire? What happened?" She looked in the direction of Jianghe County. Flames filled the sky and dyed the dark sky red. The color was between red and orange. No one was sure. Jiangpengji smiled and said, "Could it be that Luo Yue and the rest finally found an opportunity to burn Bogeo's precious autumn grain?" Luo Yue was also dumbfounded. This fire was very similar to the one at Sanshan Valley. The tongue of fire seemed to want to burn everything. Who set this fire? Luo Yue indicated that it was not him. Huang Song's army took advantage of the opportunity when the fire attracted the enemy's attention and retreated safely. However, they did not rest easy for long. Jiangpengji reacted after half a day. Jiangpengji said in surprise, "Bogeo retreated? But this direction doesn't seem to be retreating to Haozhou or Hejin County." Wei Ci said, "This direction is Changye." Jiangpengji looked in the direction that he was pointing. The sand table was clear at a glance. She instantly understood Huang Song's intentions. Chapter 13:18. A commander of the Federal Army who did not stream diligently was not a good ruler. There were too few forms of entertainment in ancient times. Without the salted fish who talked nonsense in the streaming room, what fun would there be in life? Jiangpengji had just started the streaming room when 850,000 salted fish flooded in. Her nose seemed to smell the salty smell of the sea. Of course, the screen full of greetings of "Good morning" warmed her heart. Lemon slice soaking water, "Good morning, streamer." Why do I feel that the surroundings are strange? Kneel for the emperor, it's indeed strange. Is it because of the air? The audience muttered in their hearts. Jiangpengji did not answer. She finished the rough pancakes in her hand and drank a bowl of thick porridge with meat broth. Seeing her stretch out her tongue to lick the porridge off the corner of her mouth, one of the audience lamented. "Lemon honey tea, streamer, you're the first Duke of Dongqing. If you round it up, you're the leader of the country. Your food should be more exquisite. Didn't the ancients say that one could never get tired of eating delicacies? Seeing you in such a pitiful state every day, I'm embarrassed to eat a sumptuous meal." Although it sounded like he was showing off, he was right. Jiangpengji really did not care about him. She did not answer. Instead, she walked out of the military tent and gestured for the audience to look in a certain direction. Huang Bogeo was really generous last night. He burned half of the autumn grain in Jianghe district. That's more than 1,000,000 dawn of grain. Jiangpengji sighed. She knew what Huang Song meant. He burned the autumn grain that could not be harvested in time and did not leave a single grain for her. She did not lack grain, but she was not rich either. It was better to live a simple life. It would prevent her from going from extravagance to frugality. There were people who specially baked rough pancakes and cooked thick porridge for her breakfast. It was a good treatment. The audience did not understand Jiang Pengji's sentiments. Instead, they stared at the thick gray smoke on the screen, dumbfounded. Setting a mountain on fire and spending the rest of his life in prison. In her era, Huang Song's actions would not be as simple as going to prison. He would even have to pay with his life. The fire was not small. It spread throughout the fertile fields in Zhanghe district. The fire had been burning since last night. It was estimated that it would burn for another day. Fengzi, the people of Hu County are too pitiful. The grain that they painstakingly planted for a year has been destroyed by 2 wastrels. Luoyue burned hundreds of miles of fertile fields in the Sanshan Valley, while Huang Song burned the ripe crops in Zhanghe district. According to the price of goods in ancient times, these 2 fellows would definitely be in the top 3 of the list of prodigals. Jiang Pengji said, fighting a war is a money-burning activity. The audience in the streaming room thought about Jiang Pengji's breakfast and the food that was destroyed by the 2 fires. Even they could not help but feel sorry for her. Tudu Feiqiu, that's not right. Huang Song's troops are in Zhanghe County. Why would he burn this place down? It didn't make sense. The audience's attention was focused on Huang Song is a prodigal and neglected other areas. Lingjun Sun Wenrua, they must have retreated when the fire attracted the attention of the host army. The audience chimed in one after another, and they managed to piece together the truth. Jiang Pengji didn't lead the troops to chase after Huang Song last night. Instead, she gave the troops a night to adjust their state of mind. Only on the second day did they break camp and march. However, she did not immediately head to Changye to fight with Huang Song, because Huang Song had adopted a stance of fighting to the death. Jiang Pengji could not afford to be complacent. She said to the people beside her, "Let's meet up with Luoyue and the others first. I've thought about some things for a long time. I can't let others take advantage of me." "What is it?" Naturally, it was to punish the traitor who had betrayed her. Han Yu said, "Why don't we keep these people and deal with them later?" Of course, he hated traitors, but wouldn't it be a bad time to deal with them? They should focus on the battle with Huang Song. Those traitors were not worthy of the Lord's time and effort to deal with them. Jiang Pengji smiled. "Wenbin, you can't settle the score like this. When I told others that I was sick, they climbed over the wall and stabbed me in the back. I even caught them red-handed. What wouldn't they do when they knew that they were going to die? If I were to fight Bogeo and they played dirty tricks, flirted with Bogeo, and set me up, how would I settle the score? Even if Bogeo was more skilled, these people wouldn't have to die. Instead, they would become heroes who claimed credit from Bogeo. Wouldn't that be letting them off easy?" Han Yu had finally witnessed his lord's narrow-mindedness and ability to hold a grudge. He sighed. "They are just some fickle villains. There is no need for my lord to delay the battle and specially deal with them." Although that was what he said, Han Yu did not stop Jiang Pengji. It would only take 1 or 2 days, and they could afford to wait. Besides, killing these traitors as a sacrifice could also boost the morale of the army. It was not a bad thing. There were 2 groups of people who had betrayed Jiang Pengji. The first group was from Zhanghe County. These people not only betrayed her, but they also put their betrayal into practice. In the end, they turned to Huang Song. These people were still under Huang Song's protection. If Jiang Pengji wanted to kill them, Huang Song would have to be involved. The second group was those who flirted with Huang Song and secretly communicated with him. They had not yet climbed over to Huang Song's side. They were arrested by Luoyue and kept under strict supervision. Jiang Pengji now had to deal with these people. After spending most of the day, Jiang Pengji and Luoyue's troops successfully met up. When Luoyue saw Jiang Pengji, he immediately got off his horse and apologized. "I was not strict in commanding the troops, so the villains took advantage of the loopholes and caused us to lose the battle. Please punish me, my lord." Honest and honest Yang Jingrong. Wait, since when did the host have such a person? Most of the audience was unfamiliar with Luo Yue. Many of the older audience members could not remember who he was. If it was not for Jiang Pengji's outstanding memory, she might have forgotten about Luo Yue, who did not fight for anything and had no sense of presence. You can't be blamed for the incident in Hu County. Although you are responsible, you only have to bear 30% of the responsibility. As for the burning of the grain in Sanshan Valley, it was forced by the situation after all. The most important thing is to protect the troops and horses in the camp. The grain can be planted again if it's gone, but the people are gone. Jiang Pengji did not put all the blame on Luo Yue, but she did not say that he was not at fault either. In the end, she heavily punished Luo Yue with a few months' worth of military pay and reprimanded him verbally. What about those people? Have you seen them all? Jiang Pengji asked. Luo Yue was stunned for a moment. He did not know who she was referring to. Only Meng Heng reacted. My lord wants to interrogate them now? Jiang Pengji said coldly, kill them as a sacrifice to the flag and the souls of the heroes. If we don't interrogate them now, are we going to keep them alive for the new year? She did not make the people who betrayed her pay the price immediately. Instead, she allowed them to linger on for a few months. This was already very merciful. Meng Heng sent someone to bring in the group of masterminds. He also handed a treasured name list to Jiang Pengji. Looking at the situation, everyone was confident. The salted fish in the live stream was anxious and fearful. He had a feeling that something big was going to happen. Ai de Tian Lingling, streamer, what are you doing? Chapter 13:19. Just as Jiang Pengji had said, she was there to collect a debt. Those who betrayed her and caused the soldiers under her command to die in vain were directly or indirectly related to these people. She was a magnanimous person, but she was also stingy. This debt must be paid with their heads. Meng Heng and the others did not mistreat the prisoners, but before they were captured, these prisoners had been living a life of luxury. The mouthwash they used was a precious item that ordinary people could not afford. They suddenly lost everything and were treated like ordinary soldiers. Naturally, they could not adapt. When they were brought before Jiang Pengji, their faces were yellow, oily, and dark. Their clothes were wrinkled like dried vegetables. Do you know who I am? Jiang Pengji asked them with a smile, but her smile did not have much of a smile. Instead, it gave the illusion that it was bone-chilling. More than 10 people were pressed to the ground and kneeling. Their hands were tied behind their backs. If they wore prison clothes, they would really look like prisoners. One of them said, Lu Shi, why did you capture us? Aren't you afraid of being despised and cruel? Not only did I capture you, but I also wanted to kill you as a sacrifice. I can't control other people's mouths. They can say whatever they want. Can they hurt me? Whether it's your merits or demerits will be judged by future generations. You know very well what you've done, Jiang Pengji said. Let me give you a piece of advice. If you confess, you'll be lenient. If you resist, you'll be severely punished. Admit it quickly. Don't make a fuss until you lose your last shred of dignity. That won't look good. Of course, there was evidence. Meng Heng had always been cautious. The evidence of these fellows colluding with Huang Song was well kept. With such evidence in hand, Jiang Pengji could not kill them. Even if she killed their clansmen, people would only applaud and praise her for doing a good job. When Jiang Pengji mentioned this, the few people who were jumping around suddenly stopped talking. They were guilty and afraid. Everyone was scared out of their wits. Instead, one of them knelt down and asked her, do you have the ambition to rule the world? Jiang Pengji was not angry. Instead, she laughed and asked, what do you think? I know that I will die, so I dare not defend myself. But if you have such ambition, do you know that the reward is equal to the merit and the punishment is equal to the crime? The reward should be equal to the merit and the punishment should be equal to the crime. Of course, Jiang Pengji understood what he meant. Are you implying that I'm not giving out proper rewards and punishments? That person shook his head. Of course, he wouldn't court death like that. This wasn't courage or backbone. This was courting death by dragging his entire family with him. I wouldn't dare, it's just that going too far is as bad as not going far enough. Although the crime of colluding with the enemy is punishable by death, there are also different degrees of severity. The man was so scared that he almost bit his tongue. His face was flushed red, but he still forced himself to say, when rewards are given, the soldiers will definitely fight to kill the enemy and gain merit. The punishment is appropriate for the crime. Those who commit serious crimes will plead guilty, while those who commit light crimes will learn from it. They will be grateful and won't dare to do it again. This will also deter those who have ulterior motives. If the Duke of Lanting did not distinguish between right and wrong, regardless of the severity of the crime, and executed all of them, wouldn't that be unfair? Han Yu couldn't help but look at the man after he finished talking. What you said makes sense. The punishment for a completed crime and an attempted crime are always different. Jiang Pengji smiled and changed the topic. But for me, colluding with the enemy is colluding with the enemy. It's a fact that you colluded with Bogeo. Your ambition is written in black and white on the letter. Is it not a betrayal just because your family didn't have time to move to Bogeo's territory? Normally, Jiang Pengji wouldn't have bothered to explain so much. But Han Yu was there. She had to make it clear so that she wouldn't ruin her image. The man's face turned red. He couldn't argue with Jiang Pengji. This is betrayal and colluding with the enemy. Jiang Pengji continued, if we really want to talk about the severity of the crime, you guys are slightly less serious than the families in Zhanghe County. If it was more serious, they would die, but if it was less serious, they would still die. The only difference was that the former would die more, while the latter would die less. No one dared to make a sound. The man took a deep breath and asked, if that's the case, how does the Duke of Lanting plan to deal with us? Kill them. It was an expected answer, but he was more concerned about how Jiang Pengji would deal with his family. Jiang Pengji naturally didn't have that much time to deal with it. She directly handed it over to Han Yu. The lightest punishment would be the extermination of one family, while the heaviest punishment would be the execution of all three families. If Jiang Pengji was still the commander of the federal army, she certainly wouldn't do that. According to the federal law, an individual who committed treason and colluded with the enemy would only be sentenced to death. In serious cases, the family members' freedom would be restricted and they would be put under observation for a few years, but they wouldn't lose their lives. However, this was ancient times, a place where the development of all aspects of society was extremely backward. Although the family members didn't have the intention to commit a crime, due to various considerations, they still had to be punished with capital punishment to achieve the effect of deterrence. Jiang Pengji wouldn't be too serious about this. She still had to go with the flow. Han Yu carried out his orders. The masterminds that he caught were all thrown to the flag by Jiang Pengji. The flag was sacrificed before the expedition, so as to stimulate the soldiers' fighting spirit and morale. Jiang Pengji also asked Wei Ci to write an elegiac oration for the 6,000 soldiers who had died in vain. The effect of this move was outstanding. The soldiers were sad and angry at the same time, but at the same time, their fighting spirit was ignited. They couldn't wait to rush to Huang Song and defeat him. The disloyal people were anxious. If they wanted to betray her in the future, they would have to think twice about whether the thing on their necks was more important or taking the risk for their future. Jiang Pengji felt refreshed after collecting a debt. Next, she would go to Changye to settle things with Huang Song. All troops, set off. After the army rested and reorganized, they set off again. Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen out of boredom. Only then did she realize that the bullet screen was much quieter. It was really hard to adapt to a salted fish who didn't talk nonsense. The salted fish was frightened by the way she sacrificed people to the flag. He trembled in front of the screen. Jiang Pengji looked at the bullet screen for a while, then she turned off the bullet screen and focused on marching. Wei Si and the others were also silent. As time went by, their expressions became more and more solemn. The whole army was permeated with a solemn atmosphere. This battle was related to whether the territory of Dongqing would be completely in Jiang Pengji's pocket. Naturally, no one was in the mood to talk about other things. Jiang Pengji drew up a battle plan as they hurried on the road. She was so busy that she couldn't rest. Report, traces of the enemy's march have been found ahead. It seems that we're on the right path, Jiang Pengji said. All troops, on guard. Although it was only traces of the enemy's march, there was no guarantee that the enemy would launch a sneak attack halfway. It was better to be cautious and take precautions. Because Jiang Pengji had to rendezvous with Luoyue, she wasted some time dealing with a few traitors and sacrificing them to the flag. Therefore, she was delayed for nearly 2 days. Huang Song had set off earlier than her. It was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't set up an ambush. In fact, Huang Song was even more nervous than she was. However, the scouts that were sent out could not find any traces of Jiang Pengji's army. This made him even more flustered. He was like a criminal awaiting his death sentence. In addition, Chapter 13:20. The officials left the palace in 2s and 3s with the same question in their hearts. What happened to His Majesty recently? In my opinion, we should ask Zixiao about this. He must know the best. Feng Zhen's residence was close to Yang Xi's, and their temperaments were to his liking. They often went to court together. Yang Xi asked if he knew the reason why His Majesty was unhappy recently. Feng Zhen couldn't answer, so he pushed Wei Si out. Yang Xi secretly took out some snacks from his sleeve and stuffed them into his mouth. Morning court was too early. In order not to make a fool of themselves in court, the officials often didn't dare to eat breakfast. This was such a cruel thing for a foodie. Yang Xi could only bring his own snacks to fill his stomach. Feng Zhen was also hungry. He reached into Yang Xi's sleeve and skillfully found his snacks. One couldn't help but wonder if Feng Zhen liked to hang out with Yang Xi because of their similar temperaments or because of Yang Xi's snacks. Yang Xi said, "Of course I asked, but Zixiao doesn't know either." Sigh, His Majesty is indeed more irritable than usual these days. His superior's face was sullen all day, as if everyone owed her millions. The officials were also under a lot of pressure. Every morning when the imperial court was presented, even the group of imperial censors who loved to stir up trouble were as quiet as chickens. Feng Zhen put his hand on Yang Xi's shoulder and frowned. Even Zixiao doesn't know? It looks like the situation is quite serious. Yang Xi slapped Feng Zhen's hand away in disgust. If you don't want to be criticized by the imperial censors, you should behave yourself. Feng Zhen wore a dignified official's robe, but this prodigal always had the ability to wear formal clothes as a uniform. He was often criticized by the imperial censors. Although the position of the imperial censors wasn't high, their authority wasn't small. From admonishing the emperor to supervising the officials, there was nothing they didn't dare to criticize. From important matters of state to trivial matters like clothing and speech, they would feel uncomfortable if they didn't criticize them every day. Feng Zhen laughed. There's no need to worry when there are so many lice. Yang Xi laughed coldly. Don't you feel embarrassed when your father is criticized by your son in court? Feng Yi had also reached the age to enter officialdom, but this child didn't choose to be sent out to gain experience. Instead, he chose to become the supervising imperial censor. This child was really merciless in his actions. He would scold a group of uncles and elders without hesitation. His upright temperament was the complete opposite of his father's. Although the rank of an imperial censor was not high, not everyone could become one. The job requirements were even stricter than that of an ordinary official position. Not only did they have to forget their personal interests and country, but they also had to be upright, straightforward, and daring to speak frankly. They had to be knowledgeable, be well versed in the government affairs of various places, and be knowledgeable in the past and present. For Feng Yi to be able to become an imperial censor at such a young age, she naturally had a solid foundation. Her only regret was that she had offended too many people. A few days ago, he even insulted his father. He didn't know if Feng Zhen had punished Feng Yi according to the family rules after she returned. Feng Zhen laughed shamelessly. It's not embarrassing. Other people don't even have the chance to be embarrassed even if they wanted to. Yang Si decisively stopped the topic of self-torture and forcefully changed the topic. Why don't we persuade Her Majesty to let the imperial physicians examine her carefully? Yang Si said, her face is gloomy all day long, and she's so timid that she can't stand being frightened. You don't know this, but the official living next door was so scared that he had nightmares every night. Within 2 days, he claimed to be sick and stayed at home. It was all an act. Her Majesty's aura was too strong. When she was in a bad mood, the hundreds of officials going to court was as tragic as going to hell to meet their deaths. Feng Zhen replied, I wouldn't dare. If the imperial physician says that His Majesty is angry because the geraniums have gone extinct, Yang Si was shocked by Feng Zhen's guess. How old is His Majesty? How could he have gone extinct? Feng Zhen said, isn't this just a guess? He guessed that Jiang Pengji was in a bad mood because the Tiankui was extinct. Feng Zhen wasn't the only one. However, the officials did not dare to inquire about the emperor's condition. To put it nicely, they were concerned. To put it bluntly, they were spying on the emperor's body. Fortunately, His Majesty already had Her Highness the Crown Princess. If Tian Kuei died, many officials shuddered and didn't dare to continue thinking about it. It was said that once a woman's temperament went berserk, her temper would last for a year or two. How were they going to survive in the future? Jiang Pengji looked at Wei Ci with a what the F*** expression. Is this how those fellows usually talk about me behind my back? Jiang Pengji didn't like to refer to herself as the emperor. She still used I in private, unless it was a more important occasion. Wei Ci smiled and said, His Majesty has been upset recently. The officials are naturally worried about His Majesty's body. Jiang Pengji chuckled and suddenly covered her face with her hands. Zixiao, you can leave. I want some peace and quiet. Wei Ci asked, what exactly is His Majesty upset about? Jiang Pengji was like a salted fish. What will come will come. I'm fine. I've just embarrassed myself recently. Just let me have some peace and quiet. Wei Ci didn't understand, but apart from Jiang Pengji being in a bad mood, there was nothing wrong with her. He could only leave in confusion. As soon as he left, a large string of golden bullet screens popped up in the live stream. There were only 2 types of bullet screens in Jiang Pengji's live stream room, red and blue. However, a 3rd type popped up a while ago, golden bullet screens. She was studying what was going on with the golden bullet screens when one of the bullet screens caught her attention. When will the commander be single, Jiang Pengji? The streamer's name is exactly the same as our commander's. When she saw the content, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She quickly wanted to close the live stream room, but she was stunned to find that the close button could not be used. The live stream room had switched to a timer mode. Tudu Feiqiu, eh? I remember that the streamer is the future commander of the Federation's army. Gue Kai Guofengxiu, and it's the 7th army. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, could it be an acquaintance? Such a coincidence? Jiang Pengji was speechless. Fu K, did this group of salted fish have any brains? They revealed her secret the moment they came. Were they that happy to watch her charaba? After a while, there were more and more golden bullet screens in the live stream room. These people did not seem to be limited by the upper limit of 850,000 viewers. It only took a moment for them to get off the horse. Even though Jiang Pengji was using Lu Shi's body, her temperament and habits were all her own. Those who were familiar with her could find something fishy. The salted fish in the live stream room were still happily revealing her secret. It wouldn't take long for Jiang Pengji's disguise to be exposed. What a heartless world. For all, the crowd did not care about her violent psychological activities. Instead, they added fuel to the fire. It was as if they had found an organization to expose Jiang Pengji's dark secrets. The salted fish from the 3 dimensions had a cordial meeting. Jiang Pengji felt that she had lost her face to the abyss of the Sea of Stars. It took more than 10 years to build a small farm. The army commander has a second spring in her life. The mature royal sister was once a handsome lowly. 10,000 credits to buy the lowly photo of the army commander at a high price. Stewed a frog for more than 10 years. The mystery of the army commander's single status was finally revealed. Transmigrated to save the loner. She gave up being the army commander and ran to be a farmer on a small farm. Was this the fall of human nature or the tragedy of society? Jiang Pengji suddenly sat up straight. She was so scared that she broke out in a cold sweat. Wei Ci asked, "Did you have a nightmare?" Jiang Pengji said, "I had a super scary dream." What dream? The dark history that I tried so hard to cover up was all revealed. As a big shot, how could such an embarrassing thing happen? Chapter 13:21. Is this place Chanya? It's really desolate. Jiang Pengji was worried halfway, but she didn't expect Huang Song to have no intention of ambushing them. Instead, she thought too much. Chanya was a small place near Hu County. The terrain was flat and wide. Although there were mountains, the terrain was very flat. If the place was renovated, the river water would be diverted, the soil would be fertile, and it could be managed seriously for 3 to 5 years. Perhaps it would become a good grain-producing district. Along the way, Jiang Pengji found many ruins of houses. She could vaguely make out the appearance of a village or small town. Green vines and weeds crawled on the broken walls. Many snakes, insects, rats, and ants hid there. After entering Chanya and marching for a few miles, she didn't see any signs of human habitation. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but complain, choosing this place as the location for the battle. Does Bogeo think that his grave is not desolate enough? Chanya was even more desolate than the place where the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group had wreaked havoc. It was as if it had been forgotten by the whole world. There have been several outbreaks of plague here. The people who could move away have moved away. Those who couldn't move away in time, most of them died of illness. Chanya was a district that produced abundant grain. Unexpectedly, the rain flowed backward and washed the floating corpses left behind from other battles. The plague ran rampant, and the small town with a population of tens of thousands died. Many years had passed since then. The people who moved away still didn't dare to step into Chanya. While they were talking, a group of scouts rushed over on horseback. Report, the enemy has set up camp 15 miles away. Continue to investigate. Jiang Pengji said, "Let's choose a place to set up camp." Setting up camp was a skill. Not only did they have to choose a good place, but they also had to consider the structure of the entire camp. Both aspects were satisfied. Not only could they prevent the enemy from ambushing them, but they could also take the initiative on the battlefield. However, Huang Song had arrived earlier than them. He must have thought it through and picked a good place. It would be difficult for Jiang Pengji to take advantage of him. Setting up camp was prioritized near a water source. It was convenient for the soldiers to use water daily. This was one of the most basic principles of setting up camp. Shirji, why don't you set up camp on a nearby hill? At least you can take advantage of the terrain. As for the water source, there should be spring water, right? It satisfies the needs of the terrain and water source. The streamer chose this place, which is very convenient for the enemy to attack. Qixing Fengming, streamer, don't listen to the streamer's nonsense. Isn't it shameful of a layman to guide an expert? If the host does as you say, the host will immediately become the next Masu. It was currently autumn, and the spring was gradually drying up. Even if it was spring and summer, could the spring water on the mountain supply the hundreds of thousands of soldiers? Without a water source, Huang Song didn't have to do anything. He could just block the foot of the mountain and set fire to the host. Choosing to build a camp on flat ground was not a complete disadvantage for the streamer. After all, the cavalry under her command was not just for show. Jiang Pengji did not pay attention to the streaming room. Naturally, she did not see the bullet screen. Report: a large number of skeletons have been discovered near the barracks. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and smiled at the people beside her. Did we set up camp on someone else's burial mound? This was because burial was popular in ancient times, and some places even preferred sky burial. It was very normal to randomly dig up someone's grave. Jiang Pengji had been away fighting wars for so many years, and she often encountered such awkward situations. However, she would not change the location of the camp just because it was on someone's grave. At most, she would ask the owner of the grave to move to another place. I don't think so. Changye used to be the capital of a small country during the period of the 16 kingdoms. Several wars broke out here, so it is normal to dig up a large number of skeletons. When Han Yu saw that all the skeletons were headless, he was even more convinced of his judgment. During the period of the 16 kingdoms, military merits were calculated based on the number of people killed. It was normal to cut off the heads of captives in exchange for military merits. Now it was changed. It was not convenient to carry a human head around, so the ears or noses of the enemies were usually cut off. Jiang Pengji also went to take a look. The pit was full of densely packed corpses, and they were all headless. She also found a pit full of heads nearby. Jiang Pengji sighed with emotion. It's better to burn the corpses in a war. It's also convenient. It's better than leaving the corpses in the wilderness. Han Yu secretly glanced at his lord. If they were burned, there would be no bones left. He really could not see how it was better than leaving the corpses in the wilderness. However, his lord had always liked to burn the corpses of her enemies. It had been a habit for almost 10 years, and everyone was used to it. The area of the barracks was huge. Apart from the corpses left from the ancient battlefields, the graves of ordinary people would always be accidentally burned. She found that the corpses of the people didn't have heads. Why? Did someone dig up the graves and steal the corpses, then cut off their heads to pass it off as military merits? It's possible. But there was a funeral custom in Changye where the corpses were separated from their families. Moreover, these graves look very intact and have not been touched by anyone. It should be done by the people themselves, Han Yu said slowly. My lord, you also know that Changye is the burial place of the prime minister of the previous dynasty, right? During the years when the plague broke out in Changye, the prime minister's grave was robbed and the bandits invaded it. Many people thought that the plague was a disaster sent by the prime minister. Only by separating the corpses after death could the anger of the prime minister be appeased. That's why such a custom came into being. I don't see the logic in it. When the plague broke out, they didn't find the source of infection or control the infection channel. Instead, they sent secret letters and made up alarmist rumors. It was ridiculous. Get rid of all the corpses. Remember to stay away from the water source. Even without Jiang Pengji's special reminder, the soldiers would not make such a mistake. Jiang Pengji had high requirements for hygiene, which resulted in the soldiers under her command getting sick far less often than other feudal lords due to acclimatization. The first night of setting up camp was also a good opportunity for the enemy to launch a sneak attack. Jiang Pengji had just arrived with her troops and was busy setting up the camp. The soldiers were exhausted, but the enemy had finished resting. The enemy could launch a sneak attack before the camp was fully formed and the soldiers were not energetic. Jiang Pengji said with certainty, Bogeo will attack the camp tonight to test us. Tell the soldiers to patrol carefully and not to let their guard down. Han Yu and the others were only 50% sure that Huang Song would not attack the camp tonight, but Jiang Pengji knew that he would definitely come. Huang Song would not let this opportunity slip by. The situation was very unfavorable for him. He naturally had to find a chance to boost the morale. A night attack was a good choice. On the battlefield, Huang Song did not have as many troops as Jiang Pengji. Their combat power was not equal, so the chances of winning were not high. Therefore, he had to find another way. It was close to midnight. The scouts sent to keep an eye on the enemy's camp did not find any signs of the enemy moving troops. No movement. Everyone was quite surprised. Did Huang Song give up this opportunity? Jiang Pengji stayed in the main tent. From time to time, the sound of candles crackling could be heard in the air. The swaying candlelight illuminated the main tent. She did not take off her armor. Instead, she sat upright and meditated. She closed her eyes and relaxed her spirit. Her god-slaying sword was placed flat on her knees. Would Huang Song let go of this opportunity? Of course not. It's inevitable that we have an unfair advantage. Chapter 13:22. Spirit was also a form of energy. Due to the two subsystems in her mental brain domain, Jiang Pengji rarely used it on a large scale. She wanted to prevent her mental strength from being empty and giving the subsystems a chance to stir up trouble. Usually, she strictly controlled the range of her spirit and only covered 100 meters around her. If outsiders stepped into the range of her mental domain, she would be able to discover their existence. It was an excellent means of warning. In the future Federation, it was extremely difficult for outsiders to assassinate a master with a strong mental brain domain because they could not avoid the first warning line. Of course, if the killer was also a master with a strong brain domain and extremely precise mental control, there was still a chance of success. However, Jiang Pengji had yet to encounter one. In the past, the range of Jiang Pengji's mental coverage was at least a radius of 10,000 meters. Now, who could snipe her from 10,000 meters away? A radius of 100 meters was enough, and it could be used all day long. Out of caution, when she arrived with her troops, she used her spirit to check carefully. As long as the duration was short, the consumption of her spirit was not great. Soon after, she found thousands of people hiding in the deep mountains. What were these people doing? It was easy to figure it out. According to normal people's thinking, the troops attacking at night must have come from the camp. Therefore, keeping an eye on the enemy's camp could determine the timing of the enemy's attack. As soon as they moved, the scouts would sound the alarm. Who would have thought that Huang Song would send troops to hide in the mountains early in the morning? Because they knew that Jiang Pengji would not choose to camp in the mountains, the traces of this group of people would not be exposed. What time is it now? Jiang Pengji stood up and picked up the god-slaying sword on the mat. She asked the soldiers guarding outside in a clear voice. "My lord, it's 1:15 midnight." Jiang Pengji calculated the time and strode out of the main tent. "Send someone to inform them immediately that the enemy is coming. The northeast side of the main camp is on alert." Jiang Pengji did not use the camera in the streaming room. Although using the camera would not consume her own mental strength, the field of view was limited. Once there was an obstacle, there would be a blind spot in some places. In contrast, Jiang Pengji's mental strength was omnipresent. The soldier was stunned for a moment, as if he was surprised how Jiang Pengji knew this news. "Yes." The guard immediately ran out. The rest of the people stood in place and guarded the main tent loyally. Jiang Pengji whistled. Little White, who was sleeping nearby, seemed to feel it. It woke up and snorted, then ran toward her. At the same time, the enemy's thousands of troops were ready for battle. In order to reduce their movements, the horses' hooves were wrapped in dried grass, and the horses' mouths were also covered. When the appointed time arrived, a black shadow ran over like a ghost. The other party lowered his voice and said, "General, everything is ready." "What's the situation in the enemy's camp?" The man said, "The patrols are still tight, but the tents have not been set up yet. The northeast direction is the best place to break through." The hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the camp were connected to each other, stretching for dozens of miles. This was a huge project. Even with so many people working together, building a proper camp was not something that could be completed in a day. Jiang Pengji's camp was still half finished. The soldiers in charge of logistics were working overtime to build it. The encampment was the first line of defense. If the basic line of defense was not built, it would be easy for the enemy to launch a sneak attack. Gather the troops and set off. The night was dark, and the campfire in the distance lit up the camp like the brightest pearl in the night. In ancient times, the conditions for a night attack were harsh. Because the people were malnourished, the prevalence of night blindness was extremely high. Huang Song took great pains to select these thousands of people. The night was dark, but they could still see the road clearly. They sneaked all the way to the enemy's camp. They thought they were being careful, but they did not know that everything was under Jiang Pengji's control. The camera in the streaming room had a visual angle, but her spirit did not. She clearly saw the thousands of people split into two groups and sneaked out of the camp. The enemy was right under her nose, but Jiang Pengji still had the mood to joke. Wenbin, don't you think this is like what happened in Shanwu City? Han Yu was stunned. It took him a while to understand what Jiang Pengji was referring to. During the Battle of Shanwu City, Han Yu took advantage of the blind spot of the deserters to secretly send out the men to attack at night. If Jiang Pengji's martial arts were not so good, maybe Xie Zhe's night attack would have been successful. Once she died, the crisis in Shanwu City would be solved. Han Yu smiled. You think it's similar, my lord? Jiang Pengji said sincerely, but Bogeo's is not as good as yours. Jiang Pengji really did not notice Han Yu's sneak attack. Her usual alert range was either 100 meters or covered the whole camp. It rarely extended beyond the camp. Because the larger the alert range, the longer it lasted, the heavier the burden on her and the easier it was for the system to play tricks. Han Yu said, "You flatter me, my lord. I don't deserve it." His lord was very stingy, but she was also very magnanimous. If an ordinary person were to talk about how they had suffered a setback, they would definitely feel uncomfortable. But Jiang Pengji was different. She not only took the initiative to mention it, but she also used it to tease others. She did not hold a grudge at all. Han Yu was not used to it. He was shocked by her at first and thought she was going to settle scores with him. As they were talking, the enemy had already sneaked out of the northeast camp. Because the watchtower had not been built yet, the alert range of the camp was limited. However, if they were closer, they would be easily discovered. Jiang Pengji suddenly said, "They're coming." As soon as she finished speaking, the enemy's arrows flew over the crude wooden fence of the camp. The arrows rained down from the sky. For a moment, there were several screams in the camp. It was creepy. Because Jiang Pengji had asked them to be alert, the soldiers nearby immediately reacted after the wave of arrows. They sounded the alarm and organized to defend against the enemy. The enemy also rushed in at this time. Hundreds of armored horses broke through the paper-made wooden fence. Without the wooden fence, the enemy followed closely behind and successfully rushed into the camp. The archers lit up the fire arrows. Kill, enemy attack. The movement quickly spread to the whole camp. Like a pot of boiling hot water, the whole camp was alarmed. The enemy came aggressively, like a hot knife cutting through butter. They rushed in all the way, but they soon found something was wrong. The soldiers under Jiang Pengji's tent reacted too quickly. The fierce momentum seemed to have hit an iron plate and suddenly slowed down. The enemy appeared one after another, and the soldiers from both sides were in a mess. Oh no! We've been tricked. Such a swift reaction speed was a clear indication that the enemy was well prepared. Chapter 13:23. General, the enemy is already prepared. What do we do now? Seeing that the number of enemies was increasing, their charge was met with a strong obstacle, and it was difficult for them to advance. Instead, they were being suppressed by the enemy. Seeing this situation, the general in charge of the sneak attack was so angry that his eyes turned red, but the weapon in his hand never stopped, and blood dyed the ground. Fight and retreat. He was one of the few generals under Huang Song's command who did not come from the Yuancher family. He was extremely decisive. Seeing that the enemy had already set up an ambush, he decisively chose to give up. However, he did not order his soldiers to turn and run. Instead, he ordered them to retreat in an orderly manner. As long as they could retreat before the enemy reinforcements arrived, it would not be a problem to preserve most of their forces. Although Jiang Pengji had more people on her side, she couldn't block them all at once. Of course, if the battle dragged on for too long, the soldiers under Jiang Pengji's command could exhaust them to death. Time was running out, and the enemy was closing in on them. The sneak attack soldiers couldn't help but feel despair as they faced the endless stream of enemies. Jiang Pengji was the first to notice the situation on the battlefield. She raised her eyebrows when she saw the general retreat decisively. There were many talents under Huang Song's command, but for some reason, they were not valued. As a result, many of them were not famous. Not to mention anything else, this person's ability to judge the situation was much better than Yuan Xian's. However, my place is not a hotel. How can you come and go as you please? Jiang Pengji laughed and gave Little White an order. Little White changed its meek behavior and galloped toward the northeast. The sneak attack came very suddenly. Even with Jiang Pengji's early warning, casualties were inevitable in a battle between two armies. When Jiang Pengji arrived on Little White's back, the area within 200 feet of the northeast barracks was a mess. Weapons and arrows were scattered everywhere. Corpses of both sides were lying on the ground. Fresh blood soaked the soil, and a strong smell of blood wafted in the hot and stuffy air. Jiang Pengji was cold. Without saying a word, she carried the god-slaying sword and joined the chaotic battle. The blade was like the black and white ghosts of impermanence's magic weapon that could reap souls. With one slash, she killed a person. She and Little White had worked together for many years, and their teamwork was excellent. She would slash, while Little White would charge and trample. Master, Xie Zhe was in charge of the northeast barracks. When he saw that his lord was also present, he was so scared that his heart almost went out on strike. Jiang Pengji gently swung the god-slaying saber. Fresh blood splattered on the ground, leaving a long trail. The tainted blood faded from the blade, and it became clean and shiny again. Yuan Gui, gather some soldiers and follow me. Xie Zhe held back countless words of ridicule in his heart, but what he blurted out was, "This general obeys your order." He turned around and called for a group of soldiers and horses, gathering more than 1,000 elites at the fastest speed. Although Xie Zhe did not have night blindness, his night vision was only at the level of an ordinary person. He wasn't blind, but he still couldn't see clearly a few feet away. He also knew how dangerous it was to fight at night. If they were not careful, they could easily be killed by the enemy. How could the Lord not understand this? Everyone, keep up. My lord, you can just leave the task of chasing after the thieves to me. Why do you need to take the risk yourself? Xie Zhe never thought that there would be a day when he would worry about his lord stealing his job. My lord is brave and good at fighting. As a general, I am deeply ashamed. They're cutting off their tail in order to survive. They're abandoning a portion of their troops to hold up the rear while the vanguard takes the opportunity to pull away. Now that the night is dark, as long as they can open up a distance of 30 to 40 feet, it will be even harder to catch up with them, Jiang Pengji said. Keep up, don't lose them. Day was different from night. A person's field of vision was limited. The enemy only had to worry about running forward, but the pursuing troops had to consider many aspects. Jiang Pengji was very clear that even if Xie Zhe led the troops to chase after them, he would at most bring back 100 or 200 corpses. The real big shots would be firing the cannons. Xie Zhe said, "My lord, the wilderness is dangerous and unpredictable." "You'd better," Jiang Pengji said, "your eyes aren't good. If I let you chase after them, the enemy will be long gone. Xiaozhe was speechless. Jiang Pengji's night vision was extremely strong. Even if this body was Lu Shi's, her night vision was still better than that of an ordinary person. Besides, no matter how fast the enemy ran, could they be faster than her mental strength? As long as they were within the range of her mental strength, she could find the enemy's position at any time. Soon, Xiaozhe understood why his lord said that their eyes weren't good. The soldiers chasing after the enemy lost them, but Jiang Pengji confidently pointed out the enemy's direction. 2 points in a line, they headed straight for it. Not long after, Xiaozhe heard the enemy's movements. Jiang Pengji took down the bow and arrows on the horse's back as she rode. She knocked an arrow and drew the bow to a full moon in one breath. Several arrows left the bowstring and flew. The arrowhead seemed to have eyes and accurately hit the backs of several people. They were suddenly ambushed. The bodies of the enemy soldiers who were hit by the arrows fell forward due to inertia. They faced the ground, their faces smashing into the ground and dragging some distance. Their companions nearby heard the movement and immediately knew that their pursuers were nearby. They were horrified. "General, the enemy has caught up," the sound of horse hooves behind them made them panic. They had finally shaken off their pursuers, but why did they come after them again? The general said, "Based on the enemy's movements, I think there aren't many pursuers. We can fight." Jiang Pengji rode Little White and charged for several feet. When dozens more people died under her sword, she acutely noticed that the enemy in front of her had stopped running and was about to get into formation to fight against them. She curled the corners of her lips and revealed a bloodthirsty smile. She raised her hand and waved her sword, accurately hitting down the stray arrows that were shot at her. She raised her sword high. Kill! Thousands of feet away from the northeast camp, the two armies collided and launched a swift and violent charge. Jiang Pengji happily harvested heads. It was really hard on Xiaozhe, who was worried about her. He was afraid that his lord would be injured if he made a mistake. "She's simply a lunatic." The enemy's general's face was ashen. How could he have imagined that Jiang Pengji would dare to run out of the camp with 1,000 or 2,000 people and chase after and intercept them? It would be fine if it was during the day, but visibility was obstructed at night. It was very easy to lose sight of the enemy and encounter unknown dangers. Jiang Pengji was like a hothead, but she still caught up with them with great precision. Of course, at that moment, he still did not know that the lunatic and hothead he mentioned were Huang Song's mortal enemies in this battle. The two armies fought and quickly rushed into a mess. It was like two different colored waves colliding with each other, merging, mixing with each other. In a chaotic battle, it was easy to accidentally injure one's own side, but Jiang Pengji did not have this concern. She killed a child with one slash of her sword. Sometimes, she could even kill a group of them with one slash. Xiaozhe could only bitterly follow his lord with his trusted subordinates. Wherever his lord went, he would go and help her clean up the small fries. He did this to protect Jiang Pengji, but it also exposed her position. The enemy did not know Jiang Pengji's identity, but someone who could be protected by so many soldiers must be a big fish. Unknowingly, Jiang Pengji steadily pulled the aggro. Even though the enemies came one after another, no one could hurt her. The battle lasted for more than an hour. Jiang Pengji steadily won the title of best of the match. Xiaozhe panted and shook his hands. Even though there were countless things he wanted to complain about in his heart, Xiaozhe looked very serious and calm on the surface, giving people a feeling that he was exceptionally reliable. Jiang Pengji was sitting on the stool, the god-slaying sword casually inserted into the ground beside her feet. When she heard Xiaozhe's voice, she raised her head and looked at him. "There are still living captives?" Xiaozhe, sure enough, his lord was killing with every slash. It was obvious that she didn't want the enemy to live. Jiang Pengji raised her hand to wipe off the blood. Even though she was full of energy, the warm-up had made her sweat. Her sweat mixed with the enemy's blood almost smeared her face. "Take them back and lock them up." Jiang Pengji sniffled, a look of disgust appearing in her eyes. She raised her hand and wiped it on her armor, then used a relatively dry part to wipe the blood off her face. The feeling of blood on her skin was truly unbearable. Right, we can also interrogate him. It would be good if we can get some information about Bogeo. If we can't, lock him up until the end of the war. Xie Zhe cupped his fists and said, "Understood." Jiang Pengji asked, "Right, did you catch any of the enemy's generals?" Xie Zhe turned around and waved his hand. Immediately, soldiers brought over 2 people who were tied up like palm sticks. The 2 were not far from Jiang Pengji. Most generals had good hearing, so they clearly heard the conversation between Jiang Pengji and Xie Zhe. The most important thing was how Xie Zhe addressed Jiang Pengji. He called her Lord. What did that mean? The 2 of them looked beet red, their gazes dull. Even the large and small wounds on their bodies could not distract them. Who knew that the rumored Duke of Lanting would personally lead troops and chase after the enemy troops in the middle of the night? If they had known that Jiang Pengji was such a suicidal person, they would have sent all their troops and only had eyes and hearts for Jiang Pengji. These 3 words were enough to kill her. Jiang Pengji casually glanced at the 2 of them and smiled warmly. "Are you under Bogeo's command?" The 2 of them were silent. It wasn't that they had never seen Jiang Pengji before. Back then, Jiang Pengji and Huang Song had joined forces to attack Meng Zhan of Cangzhou. The troops under the 2 camps had even spent the New Year together. It was nighttime now, and they were so far away. Who could recognize Jiang Pengji's blood-stained face? Not to mention them, even her mother couldn't recognize her. One of them stiffened his neck and said, "If you want to kill me or dismember me, just do as you please. Why waste your breath?" Jiang Pengji actually nodded and said, "What you said makes sense. Keeping the 2 of you alive would be a waste of my military rations. After all, we don't have enough rations. 2 more people means 2 more mouths to feed. However, I love peace and don't like to kill," she smiled, revealing a set of neat white teeth. The surrounding atmosphere became eerily silent. Xie Zhe could not help but turn around and cover his face. His lord said that she loved peace and didn't like to kill. Even if he could go against his conscience to say that, he wouldn't recognize the corpses of the enemy troops lying on the ground. Did he feel guilty saying that? The 2 captives were also shocked by Jiang Pengji's actions. For a moment, they did not know how to respond. In short, there was no way to complain. As they spoke, the sound of horses' hooves could be heard from afar. Their eyes lit up, but they soon dimmed again. The people who came were not Huang Song's troops. They were all there to support Jiang Pengji. "My lord," Jiang Pengji said, "the matter here has been settled. Send someone to clean up the battlefield. Dispose of the corpses that need to be disposed of. Don't keep them." The corpses of the enemy soldiers were burned and buried on the spot. The corpses of their own soldiers could be left with an urn for their souls to return to their hometown in the future. She waved her hand and jumped onto the back of the little white horse. Drowsiness overwhelmed her, and she couldn't help but yawn. Jiang Pengji's work and rest schedule had always been regular. After working hard for most of the night, she was more or less sleepy. She led the troops back to the camp. She asked someone to prepare a bucket of clean water for her to wash off the dirty blood on her body. She washed herself clean and slept. After the war, Han Yu and Wei Ci could work overtime. She was in charge of recuperating and building up her energy. After exercising, she bathed and slept. The quality of her sleep was exceptionally good. Huang Song's side was not so comfortable. Tonight's night attack had been planned for a long time. It was a sneak attack to pull back the fallen morale. He waited anxiously in the main tent. He did not sleep all night. His heart sank even more when the sky turned bright. Report, just as he was feeling disheartened, there was movement outside. Huang Song's spirits were lifted. "Tell me quickly. How's the battle situation?" The messenger said dejectedly, the enemy has been on guard for a long time. Our troops could not retreat in time and were entangled by the enemy. Huang Song took 2 steps back in disbelief. If his right hand was not supporting himself on the table, he would have lost his composure. Chapter 1325. Before the sneak attack, Huang Song had been mentally prepared for the possibility of failure. When the reality was right in front of him, he couldn't accept it. He was mentally prepared, but he didn't expect to lose so thoroughly. He had sent out thousands of troops, but only 200 or so returned safely. The rest were either killed in battle or captured by the enemy. How could they fight this war? Huang Song felt that he needed some time alone. When everyone heard the result of the meeting, they immediately fell silent. They lowered their heads and didn't dare to look up at Huang Song's face. They had high expectations for the sneak attack. They didn't expect the enemy to know in advance and have already made preparations. This was really unexpected. Huang Song wasn't someone who would admit defeat easily. He said, "Does anyone have any other good ideas?" The group of people discussed until dawn. They were especially tired. After all, they were all awakened from their beds by Huang Song's men. Qing Jing looked normal, but he was actually a little tired. After the meeting, he returned to his tent. Before he had time to wash up, a report came from outside. His heart skipped a beat. He mistakenly thought that it was his Lord Huang Song calling for him. He said, "Who's outside?" As soon as he finished speaking, an unfamiliar male voice came from outside. The other party's elegant words had a Hu County accent. Qing Jing vaguely guessed the other party's identity. He said in a low voice, "Come in." The person was a man dressed in a dark brown scholar's robe. To make it easier for him to move, this person's wide sleeves were tied up with wrist guards. He looked less elegant and refined, but more agile and valiant. This person exchanged a few words with Qing Jing. Qing Jing invited him to take a seat. The other party was a little cautious and sat down with slight awkwardness. As intelligent as Qing Jing was, he naturally guessed the purpose of this person's visit. As expected, the other party stiffly changed the topic to last night's sneak attack. At present, not many people knew about the situation of the battle. This person in front of him belonged to this group. He had come this time to find out more information. Qing Jing calmly stated the result. The person's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe the result. How could it be?" the other party stammered. A lot of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes flickered. Qing Jing said, "Victory and defeat are common in war. Isn't it normal for the enemy to be one step ahead?" The other party laughed dryly in response to Qing Jing's words, but his heart was beating like a drum. He could not help but be nervous and afraid. If Huang Song lost, he would definitely be punished by Jiang Pengji. Based on Jiang Pengji's deeds in the past few years, this woman could be said to be magnanimous, but in some aspects, she was exceptionally petty. She could even be said to seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Qing Jing's eyes were like an ancient well, calm and tranquil. He saw through the thoughts of this person with a single glance and laughed coldly in his heart. "Sir, are you worried that my master will not be able to defeat Lu Shi?" Qing Jing's sudden question scared the man so much that his heart almost stopped beating. He was like a frightened cat whose fur was standing on end. How could this be? The other party raised his hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead and said sheepishly, "Although Lu Shi is famous, my lord is not weaker than him." The outcome of the battle had yet to be decided, so it was still too early to make a judgment. How could I dare to boost other people's morale and diminish my lord's prestige? Qing Jing snorted coldly and declined to comment. He was extremely disgusted with two-faced people, and the person in front of him was one of them. This person was born in Zhanghe County and had lived there for generations. He had used many underhanded methods to obtain exorbitant profits. The fertile land in Zhanghe County had been occupied by his family and a few other families. Almost all the local people were cheap tenants under their control. They even secretly engaged in illegal human trafficking. Before Lu Shi went to Hu County, these families were the local tyrants of Zhanghe County. The people lived in poverty and could not see any hope. After Lu Shi took over Hu County, these local tyrants were slowly subdued and suppressed by him. They behaved themselves for a while. Previously, when Jiang Pengji pretended to be sick, they heard rumors that she did not have long to live. Their hearts were alive again. Coincidentally, Huang Song had sent someone to persuade them to rebel. This group of people took advantage of the situation and directly betrayed Jiang Pengji. As a result, Zhanghe County was lost. They waited and waited, burning 3 joss sticks a day, hoping that Jiang Pengji would quickly kneel down. Unexpectedly, she recovered from her illness. Not only did she recover from her illness, but the situation on the battlefield slowly favored her. Huang Song was also forced to abandon Qinzhou and retreat from Zhanghe County. If they had known that Jiang Pengji's life was so tenacious, they would not have sided with Huang Song so decisively. They would have at least watched for a while longer. It was too late to say anything now. They only hoped that Huang Song could turn defeat into victory and turn the tables. However, this seemed to be an extravagant hope. Qing Jing said, "If there is nothing else, please make yourself at home." It was obvious that he wanted to chase them away. The man looked embarrassed. He knew that he was not welcomed by Qing Jing. He had no choice but to bow and leave. Qing Jing did not like him, not only because he was two-faced, but also because he did not have the slightest bit of self-awareness. Could he not see what kind of person he was? To Huang Song, they were just tools that could be thrown away after he was done using them. However, they thought too highly of themselves and overestimated themselves. Qing Jing furrowed his brows and called someone over. He instructed, "Send someone to keep an eye on them. Report to me immediately if there is any movement." For such people, Qing Jing did not expect them to have such things as loyalty. Even at this critical juncture, they did not forget to sound out the situation. It was obvious what kind of people they were. They had sided with Huang Song because of Lu Shi's decline. Who knew if they would betray Huang Song for the same reason? In the face of profit, all moral principles could be put aside. Yes. Qing Jing was right. This person really had the intention of jumping ship. Huang Song's ship was about to sink. Of course they had to think of a way to save themselves. How could they save themselves? They had to think of a way. This is not very good, is it? After all, we betrayed Lu Shi. Now we have to betray Huang Song. Will Lu Shi accept this? What's not good about it? Those who achieve great things don't bother with trifles. As long as we can make a great contribution to Lu Shi, even if Lu Shi does not put us in an important position, he will not be able to settle old scores. The man rolled his eyes and said impatiently, "Huang Song has lost thousands of troops this time. He only has Haozhou left. What do you think his chances of winning against Lu Shi are? It is obvious that he will lose. I'm afraid it will be difficult to salvage the situation." In troubled times, moral principles were even cheaper than feces in a cesspit. Feces could nourish the soil, so what was the use of moral principles? There was no lack of loyal and unyielding people in the world, but these people were too arrogant and few would go along with others. Most of them were opportunists. As long as they offered enough benefits, Lu Shi would be tempted. His companion was still hesitant. He sighed. "Alas, what should we do? If we had known this would happen, we wouldn't have thought about it." After all the twists and turns, they still had to go to Jiang Pengji's camp. They had wasted so much effort. What's the use of saying this now? Finding a way out as soon as possible is the right way. Once Huang Song is defeated, we won't be able to get anything out of it. Chapter 13:26. On Huang Song's side, people's hearts were wavering, and the clouds were treacherous. On Jiang Pengji's side, it was in full swing. Of course, it was the others who were in full swing. She woke up naturally and stretched on the bed. The weather was getting colder, and the seal on the blanket was getting stronger. It took her a lot of effort to push away the clingy little demon. She changed, washed up, and started streaming. A new day had begun. Today is also a day full of vitality. In the streaming room, the salted fish noticed that Jiang Pengji was in a particularly good mood. Her smile was brighter than the clear sky outside. When the streamer marries, did the streamer pick up money today? What you said just now makes me suspect that you've been transported. Haitang Shuangzhe, could it be that the long-cherished wish of the streamer has finally come true? Has the streamer finally given up on platonic love and pushed a certain guy? With that said, everyone really felt that the streamer was particularly refreshed today. After Jiang Pengji finished her breakfast, she picked her teeth with a bamboo stick. Her actions looked particularly unrestrained and unrestrained. Her brows relaxed, and she mysteriously flirted with the salted fish audience. There was indeed a fierce battle last night. The situation was unprecedentedly intense. The enemy couldn't withstand the impact and was defeated like a landslide. The audience sent naughty bullet screams such as, "Yo yo yo, my streamer is amazing," and "Let me borrow a phone to talk." Tudu Feichio, how fierce was the battle? Jiang Pengji said, blood splattered everywhere. Gue Kai Guofengxio, where's the enemy? Where is the enemy now? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, they abandoned their helmets and armor and were utterly defeated. They were exhausted last night and are still recuperating. The group of seasoned salted fish all revealed the same mysterious smile. Their streamer was really bold and unrestrained. Lo Siji Lianmeng, let me say something. Streamer, you have to be gentler to others. Don't be too violent. Kaidian, I've been heartbroken twice on the same day. I have to bless you with tears in my eyes. Yewu Yanling, TSK, something doesn't feel right. According to the streamer's temper, it's impossible for her to publicize such a thing. The streaming room was in a mess. The salted fish audience all wailed about their heartbreak. The power of the army of heartbreakers was great. The news that Jiang Pengji had finally pushed a certain guy to his heart's content immediately hit the headlines. Because the fan base was too large, they didn't even manage to refresh twice before they awkwardly realized that the server had crashed due to them. Programmer, you're blaming me? Jiang Pengji was teasing the salted fish with a smile when she acutely sensed movement outside. She hurriedly sat up straight and looked serious. My lord, this is the account for last night's battle. Wei Ci and the rest finished working overnight. Jiang Pengji had just woken up when she delivered the results of the night's work. It included the number of casualties and various losses. The latter was to be recorded in the general ledger, while the former was to be distributed after the war. How many people died in a war? Depending on the degree of death, injury, and disability, the level of compensation and benefits would be different. One could imagine how heavy the workload was. These were things that Wei Ci would be busy with in the future, but he had no regrets. Back then, when Jiang Pengji entrusted him with the heavy responsibility of compensating the bereaved after the war, he knew how heavy the burden was. Jiang Pengji took a closer look. The number of casualties and losses were within her acceptable range. Compared to her loss, Huang Song's heart should be trembling with heartache, right? She called the others over and inquired in detail about the construction progress of the camp. It wasn't a detailed matter, but she grasped the key points steadily. The others didn't dare to skimp, so their efficiency was naturally high. Han Yu said, Huang Song failed in his sneak attack last night. He probably won't mobilize his troops in the next 2 days. If he doesn't move, I will, Jiang Pengji said. War is different from other things. It's best to end the battle quickly. Once winter came, it would be difficult to fight a war. The soldiers' winter clothing was also a huge expense. Han Yu asked, My lord, do you want to initiate the attack? Jiang Pengji nodded. She didn't want to fight a protracted war with Huang Song. This year, Hu County had lost 70% to 80% of its grain production. The loss made her heart ache. In order to avoid financial problems, she could only think of ways to save money. Han Yu said, "That's good. Our army can take advantage of Huang Song's low morale." Jiang Pengji also inquired about the training of the troops. Xie Zhe and the others didn't dare to delay and told her everything in detail. When she was done, it was time for lunch. Smoke rose from the back of the camp, and the air was filled with the fragrance of rice. The idle spectators who witnessed everything were speechless. They finally realized that they had been tricked by Jiang Pengji. Lo Siji Lianmeng, streamer, you've opened my eyes. What happened to the intense battle with blood splattering everywhere? What happened to the enemy abandoning their helmets and armor and being utterly defeated? They had wanted to talk in private before, but they never expected that the veteran players would still fail in the hands of the streamer. Tudu Feichio, #doghead, the streamer is still as naughty as ever. Are you happy being naughty? It was clearly Huang Song who ambushed her and was beaten back by her. They didn't expect her to make it sound so vague and ambiguous, leading the veteran players to fail miserably. Fukadujuo, I feel sorry for the programmers of Weibo and the servers that died unjustly. Weibo has crashed all morning. They died unjustly. Jiang Pengji spread her hands and shrugged. Was it her fault? The benevolent saw benevolence, and the wicked saw filth. What she said was the truth. Who asked them to misunderstand? Jiang Pengji smiled as she looked at the streaming room that had failed miserably. Her already radiant mood rose by a notch. Perhaps the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and found someone to make things difficult for her. Jiang Pengji sneered as she listened to the whole thing. She asked the people around her meaningfully. Are they trying to disgust Bogeo, or are they trying to disgust me? The people who had betrayed her had actually turned over a new leaf. They had even sent people to secretly express goodwill to her, hinting that they could assist her in eradicating Huang Song. She had seen thick-skinned people, but she had never seen anyone so thick-skinned. Sorry, in her case, there was no turning back for the prodigal son. There was only death. Yang Si furrowed his brows and said, could it be that Huang Song sent them to feign surrender? Jiang Pengji said, Bogeo knows my temperament. He wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Even if he wanted to feign surrender, he definitely wouldn't choose these people. She and Huang Song had also been friends of scoundrels for a while. They had a good time together. Although they hadn't confided in each other, Huang Song was a meticulous person. He had an accurate understanding of others. She didn't believe that Huang Song didn't know how she treated traitors. Yang Si revealed a look of disgust. In that case, this is their own idea? Jiang Pengji said, this is a group of short-sighted idiots. When they saw that Jiang Pengji was seriously ill, they thought that she couldn't make it, so they turned to Huang Song. Now that Huang Song had failed, they felt that Huang Song couldn't make it. They were anxious to turn to her. Yang Si rolled his eyes and laughed. How does my lord intend to deal with these people? There's no harm in. Make use of them, then throw them away after using them? There's no harm in doing so. Jiang Pengji said, I'm not so incompetent that I need these useless people to deal with Bogeo. They don't even know what kind of people they are. Do they really think that they're rare commodities and that they can pick and choose among the feudal lords? Yang Si saw that Jiang Pengji was angry, so he didn't say anything. Han Yu asked, then what does my lord mean? Jiang Pengji sneered. Chapter 1327. Since Jiang Pengji, the god of slaughter, had spoken, Yang Si, Han Yu, and the others couldn't stop her. Yang Si was better. He had followed Jiang Pengji for some years. He knew his lord's temperament very well. Han Yu wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. After the meeting, Yang Si approached Han Yu and said, why do you look like you have something on your mind? Han Yu glanced at Yang Si and didn't say anything. His expression was cold and distant. Ordinary people would have left, but Yang Si was different. He came up to Han Yu. He said, Are you worried that my lord will lure those people here and kill them? Han Yu finally opened his mouth and said slowly, "It's not good for my lord's reputation." Yang Si said, "Some people are like this. They want their reputation but lose it. If they want their reputation, they have to suffer for it. Only our aides worry about my lord's reputation. She doesn't care about it at all. Zi Xiao has been busy all these years. I've never seen him relax the storytelling team that he built up. Who else could it be for? Isn't it all for my lord? Zi Xiao is probably the most tired one for my lord to have such a good reputation. But my lord is capricious. She's not the only one who's unhappy. She can make a whole family unhappy." Han Yu said in a low voice, "From what you said, you have a lot of complaints about my lord?" Yang Si laughed. "You're really a bad person. Are you trying to get information out of me?" Han Yu said coldly, "A gentleman doesn't avoid the beauty of others and doesn't talk about their evil. Don't measure the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure." Yang Si wasn't angry. Han Yu's temperament was like that. He was so honest that he wanted to be beaten up. Oh, the point was that Yang Si couldn't beat him. Yang Si said, "It's not that I have complaints about my lord. People have thousands of temperaments. It's rare to meet a lord who is straightforward and not stupid. I just said that to tell you that my lord doesn't care so much about her reputation. She really wants to kill you." Speaking of their lord, she was also a very strange person. If one were to say that she was honest, she was sometimes glib-tongued. If one were to say that she was unrestrained, she would never bend when it was time for her to be upright. If one were to say that she was stingy, she would be willing to part with her wealth. If one were to say that she was magnanimous, if someone betrayed her once, she would want to kill that person. There were thousands of languages in the world, but Yang Si couldn't think of any words that could accurately describe his lord, let alone define her. It was probably because of this that she was able to get along well with everyone. Qiguan Rang was cautious. He only used 70% of his strength in everything and left himself some leeway. However, he did not hold back in front of his lord. Feng Jin was born in an aristocratic family and was the precious son of a noble family. No matter how good the Feng family's upbringing was, he was born with an air of nobility that separated him from others. In the end, this flower of the rich and powerful world was willing to submit to her master and help him with all her might. It had to be said that she was very capable. Feng Zhen and Wei Ci were each other's best friends. One was a playboy, while the other was an upright and elegant gentleman. Two completely different styles, yet they could get along harmoniously. However, it did not mean that the two of them could get along with the same master. In the end, the master did it. In the face of this situation, there was only one word in Yang Si's mind: all rivers run into the sea. Han Yu frowned. He was angry but powerless. You can't indulge the lord like this. Do you really think you're raising a daughter? Yang Si laughed and said, "What a coincidence. Feng Langzi asked the same question a few years ago." Han Yu was speechless. Did he really raise her as his own daughter? Yang Si expressed that there was nothing wrong with this. After all, the lord also treated them as the public's favorite. The relationship between the lord and her subjects was very harmonious. My lord's reputation is more important. Han Yu's heart wavered, but his mouth was still firm. Yang Si said casually, "The lord can do what she wants to do. Isn't it our duty to clean up after her?" To put it bluntly, she was an old maid who cleaned up messes. Han Yu said, "What do you mean?" Yang Si said, "It doesn't matter what lord does. What's important is what we should do after she's done. If their lord's reputation was really hurt, shouldn't they think of a way to reverse it?" She couldn't possibly be worried that she wouldn't be able to protect her lord's reputation and deal with the aftermath, so she stopped her actions and regulated her behavior. Han Yu was speechless. He finally understood how the lord's unruly temper came about. It was all because of these people's indulgence. Han Yu had a belly full of bitterness, but in the end, he had to fall into the mire with Yang Si. While Jiang Pengji was sharpening her knife, the pitiful fence-sitters still didn't know what was going on. Instead, they were delighted by Jiang Pengji's deliberately ambiguous attitude. However, they didn't dare to make any moves. After all, they were still in Huang Song's territory. They also needed to find an opportunity to show their role. Little did they know that what they thought was flawless was all in Qingjing's eyes. Qingjing was furious and directly informed Huang Song of the matter. Huang Song was silent for a long time. His eyebrows looked gloomy under the flickering candlelight. "My lord, this matter," Qingjing was a little hesitant. It would be fine if Huang Song directly got angry, but he didn't react at all, which was worrying. Huang Song said, "Yumo, thank you for telling me about this. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have been kept in the dark." Qingjing said, "Those two-faced villains are not worthy of your grief, my lord." "Grief?" Huang Song smiled. "I'm not grieving over this. On the contrary, I feel pity for them and their brains." Qingjing was surprised. Huang Song said, "Lanting hates people who betray her the most, not to mention people who betray her repeatedly." Qingjing hesitated. According to those people, Lu Shi seems to have the intention to accept them. This isn't like her. She doesn't have the tolerance to accept people who have betrayed her. Huang Song shook his head. If she really did accept them, it wouldn't be her. Do you still remember that when Lanting first entered Chongzhou, her father, Lu Zhongqing, wanted to matchmake her with the aristocrats of Chongzhou, but because a few people didn't know what was good for them and rashly humiliated her, she vented her anger on the entire family without saying a word. She's not a person who will compromise for the sake of benefits. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Jiang Pengji feigns civility with the aristocrats of Chongzhou. If she built a good relationship with them, she would even get help from them. What happened in the end? To put it bluntly, she couldn't stand being wronged. She could make others feel wronged, but if others made her feel wronged, she could punch them to death. She could be indifferent to the great benefits of Chongzhou, let alone others. Qingjing asked, "My lord, do you mean that Lu Shi has other plans?" "There's no harm in fulfilling their wishes. We can also take advantage of the situation and make use of them." Huang Song's eyes darkened and he sneered. "Fulfill their wishes and give them some confidential information, so that they can happily come to Lanting and claim credit. If Lanting sincerely accepts them, she'll fall into our trap. If she has other plans, it's just as well. We can use her to clean up the family. Such villains are indeed an eyesore." Chapter 13:28. Qingjing sighed. "This kind of person is not worthy of my lord's anger. Just leave this matter to me." Huang Song's expression was still not good. Even though the person who betrayed him was a fence-sitter, he still minded and was unusually angry. However, with Qingjing's persuasion, Huang Song calmed down a little. With a calm expression, he said, "I'll leave this matter to Yumo." Qingjing bowed and replied, "Yes." Courting death was not scary. What he was afraid of was being hated by both Jiang Pengji and Huang Song at the same time. Although Qingjing always acted like a gentleman, being a gentleman did not mean that he was honest and inflexible. If he really schemed against someone, the other party would willingly help him count the money after being betrayed by him. In the words of the livestream viewers, which of these think tanks and strategists did not cut the black and white? Which fat fish did not take the bait when they acted as bait? Others thought that they had taken advantage of the situation and succeeded in their scheme, but they did not know that the other party was secretly watching the show. Not long after Qingjing's scheme, the fat fish took the bait. Is this news true? Of course it's true. The person who spoke was the man who had visited Qingjing earlier. His companion was still a little worried and felt that the document in his hand was a little hot. Then tell me the details in detail. Qingjing is also an old fox. How could he be so careless as to let you steal this? The man said, "Listen to me in detail." It turned out that Qingjing felt embarrassed when he forcefully sent him away. Yesterday, he met him and invited him to sit in his tent for a while. The two of them had not exchanged greetings for long when Qingjing received the battle document sent by Huang Song. He hid the document in the bedroom behind the tent. At that moment, because of the dry weather and the soldiers' carelessness, sparks from the bonfire splashed onto the tent and caused a fire, burning several tents nearby. Qingjing thought that the document had been burned, but he did not know that the man had taken advantage of the chaos to steal all of them. This fire came too coincidentally. His companion still had doubts in his heart. The man said, "What's so strange about this? It's not uncommon for a camp to catch fire. Do you think this is a trap?" His companion hesitated and said, "It looks like it, although autumn was dry and there was a lot of withered grass, making it easy for the tents to catch fire. The timing made him a little suspicious." The man said, Qingjing was almost burned by the fire. A small part of his left hand was burnt. If the soldiers hadn't put out the fire in time, he would have died. If this was really a trap, what was Qingjing plotting? He would have sent people to capture us long ago. Why would he play the trick of injuring himself to gain our confidence? His companion said, "It's not unreasonable to say that, if Qingjing had set up a trap, it meant that Huang Song already knew that they had the intention to rebel. How could he not do anything?" Now that he thought about it, he must have been thinking too much. His companion asked, "Then what do we do now?" The man said, "To avoid any undue delay, we naturally have to pass the news to Lu Shi before Huang Song mobilizes his troops. Only then can we seize the opportunity to make meritorious service." Although the battle document was confidential, it had a time limit. They had to act before the document became invalid. His companions were a little worried. If they really betrayed Huang Song, and they continued to stay here with Huang Song, they would lose their lives. He told the man what he was worried about, and the two of them came up with a plan to escape to Lu Shi that very night. There were a total of 5 powerful families that sought refuge in Zhanghe district. The 5 families were connected by marriage, and their interests were already inseparable. Naturally, they had to act together. They immediately split up to discuss with a few others. Finally, they decided to escape at midnight that night. Qingjing had long been watching them. Naturally, he would arrange for informants, so every word of their conversation fell into Qingjing's ears. He snorted coldly and said, "They don't know that their death is near." The camp occupied a large area, and the personnel were complicated. If they had trusted subordinates as spies, it would not be difficult to disguise themselves as ordinary soldiers and sneak out. Qingjing specially opened the back door for them, so their escape was exceptionally smooth. Jiang Pengji had even prepared backup for them. Seeing backup, the few of them instantly felt relieved. Although they did not show it on their faces, they felt a little proud. Although they had betrayed Jiang Pengji, now that they had returned, she still accepted them generously. How could they not feel proud? From another perspective, they could also see how important this confidential document was. They had secrets in their hands, and the weight of the secret was equivalent to the weight of their own. When they arrived at the camp, the sky was still gloomy, but their moods were incomparably radiant. From afar, they could vaguely see countless tents prostrating on the ground. Truly stepping into Jiang Pengji's territory, they felt extremely at ease. Little did they know that the god-slaying sword in Jiang Pengji's hand was already thirsty. "Where is the Lord now?" one of them asked the soldier who was waiting for them. The soldier replied respectfully, "It's still early. The Lord should be training the troops at the training ground. Please wait for a while." They did not suspect anything. One by one, they waited in the main tent for Jiang Pengji's arrival. Even if they did not know how to read the situation, they did not dare to complain. After all, the situation was stronger than they were. If Jiang Pengji asked them to wait, they had to wait. What was Jiang Pengji doing now? Just as the soldier had said, she was warming up and training the troops at the training ground. As the Lord, how could she convince the warriors and make them loyal to her? Apart from having a charismatic personality, her fists had to be strong. To make them respect her at all times, Jiang Pengji went there every few days. This made life difficult for Qin Gong and the others. Jiang Pengji occasionally beat up the newly promoted newcomers. Most of the time, she looked for them to fight one-on-one or gang up on them. Although she had a sense of propriety and would not embarrass them, it was a pain in the ass to be completely suppressed by the Lord. Others would still think that the two of them were evenly matched. As a result, the old generals did not like to spar with Jiang Pengji. When they saw her at the training ground, they looked bitter. Qin Gong, Xie Zhe, and the others had not learned their lesson. They were eager to try. When they could not avoid her, Jiang Pengji would stop for a while. What? They're here? Jiang Pengji was wiping the sweat on her neck with a cloth. She looked refreshed. On the other hand, Qin Gong and the others looked as if they had been plucked by a demon. I'll go over now. You guys continue training. The first sentence was directed at the soldier who sent the message. The second sentence was directed at Qin Gong and the others. Yes. Jiang Pengji left. The two who had escaped heaved a long sigh of relief. Jiang Pengji strode into the main tent. She did not even look at the few people. She sat upright in the main seat and held the god-slaying sword in front of her. With such an attitude, not to mention being courteous, it could not even be considered friendly. Yang Si said, Your Highness, these are brought by these gentlemen. Please have a look. He held Huang Song's battle document in front of Jiang Pengji with both hands. She picked it up with one hand and opened it with a swoosh. She read through it quickly. Jiang Pengji's attitude was a mystery. The few people's optimistic moods sank. They held their breaths and waited for her reaction. After a while. Chapter 1329. Their hearts skipped a beat. They were so scared that their faces turned ashen. Fake surrender? Where did that come from? They were sincerely betraying Huang Song and pledging allegiance to Jiang Pengji. For a moment, fear and grievance filled their hearts, but they could not care less. They hurriedly explained to Jiang Pengji. Why did you say that, Master Lanting? We are sincerely surrendering. Sincerely? TSK, then your sincerity is really cheap, Jiang Pengji said. Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be? Do you really think I'm an ignorant woman in the backyard? This so-called document is obviously fake. Do you really think I'll take the bait so easily? Jiang Pengji's tone was very calm, but when it fell into people's ears, they felt a heavy weight pressing on their hearts. It was frightening. They were so scared that their faces turned pale. One of them immediately bent down to pick up the document on the ground. He read it carefully from beginning to end. No matter how they looked at it, the document was real. There were no flaws. Why did Jiang Pengji say it was fake? They did not know that she did not need to guess to know that it was fake. Her understanding of Huang Song was much deeper than Huang Song's understanding of her. It was impossible for the people in front of her to gain Huang Song's trust. The possibility of them getting the so-called confidential document was also very small. If secrets could be obtained so easily, why would they fight a war? They could just play spy games. Even if the document was real, Jiang Pengji did not intend to use it. The more critical the situation, the more calm one had to be. Even if Huang Song was like a grasshopper at the end of autumn, Jiang Pengji would not underestimate her enemy. Instead of believing in a secret letter whose authenticity was unknown, it was better to sit still and watch Huang Song reveal his fatal weakness in his impatience. She was not anxious. It was Huang Song who was anxious. Putting that aside, Jiang Pengji also needed an honorable reason to kill the people in front of her. Wasn't fake surrender a good excuse? As long as she insisted that the document was fake and that these people were enemies sent by Huang Song to fake surrender, wouldn't she have a reason to kill them? Although they did not know Jiang Pengji's plan, they were aware of the danger they were in. They were so scared that they broke out in a cold sweat. How dare I belittle you, Duke Lanting? They had looked down on them in the past, but Jiang Pengji's fists were tough. She made them swallow back all the words that they wanted to say. Huang Song, my son, is selfish and treats his subordinates harshly. The Yuans are rampant and domineering, and we have suffered greatly. I've heard that the Duke of Lanting is a man of great righteousness and has the appearance of a truly wise ruler. That's why we're willing to forsake the darkness and seek the light. This letter truly belongs to Huang Song. This person spoke with righteousness and awe-inspiring righteousness. If he was given a background, it would definitely be a bright and clear universe, a clear sky and bright sun. Jiang Pengji laughed. The audience in the streaming room was also in an uproar. Not last night's stars, what the hell? How shameless were these people? Fusher Roa Xiao Meng, this is totally refreshing. These people betrayed the host, didn't they? What a disgusting face. Being two-faced wasn't scary. What was scary was that the other party still had the courage to defend themselves. Even the word, shameless, wasn't enough to describe what they looked like. Fu Feng Ling, I feel even more sorry for Huang Song, my baby. This group of people picked up their bowls to eat, then put them down to curse. That's enough. They surrendered to Huang Song willingly. Now that they've expelled Huang Song, they're still slandering him. This operation is simply too awesome. Fat Dun Fuyu, Tisk, TSK. Two completely different faces. I've really learned something new. The audience had been following the streaming room for nearly 10 years. They'd seen all kinds of ancient people from Jiang Pengji's perspective. There were so many characters, but almost none of them were as disgusting as these people. They were obviously good-looking and had rather frightening appearances, but the way they ate was so unsightly. Jiang Pengji also sneered. I can't accept these compliments. When you betrayed me in Zhanghe district in Hu County, did you also say the same thing to Bogeo? You speak in human language when you see a ghost, and you speak in human language when you see a ghost. You have a sharp tongue, and your foundation in flattery is very deep. When they heard Jiang Pengji's words, they knew that she wouldn't believe them. Not only would she not believe them, but they would also be in trouble. As expected, Jiang Pengji said to the people outside the tent, guards. As soon as she finished speaking, the soldiers entered in a line. Before they could resist, they locked their hands behind their backs. I've been wronged, Lord Lanting. I've been wronged. I've been wronged. I really didn't have any ulterior motives when I surrendered this time. Lord Lanting, please understand. My loyalty to you can be witnessed by the sun and the moon. I've been wronged, seeing such a situation, how could they still maintain their dignity? They immediately began to cry out their grievances. Every word was shouted out loud. Jiang Pengji knew that they were wronged, but that wasn't important. This kind of capricious villain was a scourge if left alive. He might stab her again someday. It was better to kill him to prevent future troubles. Jiang Pengji sneered. Take them all away. After beheading them, hang their heads outside the camp for Bogeo to have a good look. When they heard this, they struggled even more fiercely. The soldiers were not to be trifled with. Their palms were broad and powerful. They clamped them firmly like iron pincers, making it impossible for them to break free. Jiang Pengji glanced at the god-slaying sword. Her eyelids drooped slightly. These traitors were not worthy enough for her to draw her sword. Not long after, a few screams came from outside the tent. The heavy heads fell to the ground and rolled twice. Blood splattered on the ground and dyed the soil. Reporting, my lord. They've been beheaded. Jiang Pengji said, hang them. Remember to wash their faces so that the enemy can see them clearly. At noon, Huang Song received the news. He laughed bitterly and said, Lanting still has an old temper. She killed them just like that. Cheng Jing was also surprised by Huang Song's understanding of Jiang Pengji. They were on opposing sides, but the Lord still addressed her by her first name. Was this considered a form of love-hate relationship? Then, should we still set up an ambush? Huang Song said, Lanting has most likely seen through that the document is fake. It's useless to set up an ambush. Instead, we'll make a fool of ourselves. Qing Jing said, if that's the case, we can only make other plans. Before the sky had completely darkened, there was a commotion outside the camp. Reporting to my lord, the enemy outside the camp has issued a letter of challenge. Huang Song hurriedly took the letter of challenge. The handwriting on it was Jiang Pengji's. The content was in accordance with her usual style, sharp and domineering. Once again, he gathered everyone for a discussion. This letter of challenge caused even more waves. Lanting has stated that the two armies will have a decisive battle. Does anyone have a countermeasure? Everyone looked at each other. If the two armies confronted each other head-on, it would be a direct confrontation. The number of our troops is inferior to the enemy. If we confront each other now, it will be extremely disadvantageous for us. Someone said sarcastically, the two armies haven't even fought yet, but they're already praising the enemy. Chapter 1330. Lanshui Yuyu, awesome, my streamer. So there really was a letter of challenge in ancient times. Xingyue Tianyun, that's not the point. The point is that my mind is filled with Zhuge Liang sent a letter of challenge to us for a decisive battle tomorrow. How should we fight the enemy? Am I overthinking it, or have I logged too much on Bilibili? I'm looking forward to the streamer and Huang Song quarreling in front of the battlefield. In this season, the days were short and the nights were long. The sky darkened early. Before the end of the broadcast, it was already dark outside. The battle would begin the next day. Jiang Pengji took her time tonight. Her slender fingers played with the bean-sized candlelight. No one knew what she was thinking. Unbeknownst to her, outsiders thought that Jiang Pengji was daydreaming, but she was actually investigating the surrounding environment. Because Huang Song's battle was very important, Jiang Pengji did not dare to take it lightly. She did not give Huang Song a chance to sneak an attack. Almost every day, she had to spread out her mental strength to investigate the enemy within 100 miles. There was no progress before, but today there was a different discovery. She furrowed her brows in deep thought. As she withdrew her mental strength, she guessed the origin of the troops. Tomorrow was the decisive battle. She did not want to be attacked by an unknown enemy halfway through the battle. Jiang Pengji shouted to the outside, quickly summon the generals. Tell them that I have something important to discuss. She suddenly shouted. Qin Gong and the others naturally rushed over without even taking off their armors. Tomorrow's decisive battle. Jiang Pengji glanced at the few of them and pointed to two newly promoted newcomers. The profession of a general was obtained through military merits. Not only did it require a certain amount of luck, but it also required a stage to perform. Jiang Pengji was quite generous in this aspect. This was also one of the reasons for the internal unity. She then said to Xiaze, Yuangue, you will lead the troops to guard the rear tomorrow. Xiaze originally thought that there would be some people, but he was dumbfounded when he heard this. Why? Why was he the one guarding the rear? Xiaze was the vanguard general. Logically, he should be the vanguard. She changed her mind at the last minute and transferred him to the rear. He plucked up the courage to ask. Jiang Pengji also gave him a reason. Jiang Pengji said seriously, I just received a secret report. There will be changes in the battlefield tomorrow. I asked you to guard the rear out of consideration as a whole. Xiaze nodded his head and stepped out to receive the order. He returned to his original valiant and high-spirited attitude, as if he could raise his spear and kill the enemy right now. Qin Gong was younger than Xiaze, but he definitely had more experience on the battlefield than Xiaze, so he was naturally more sensitive. There's a change in the battlefield tomorrow? Could it be that Huang Song still has some tricks up his sleeves? I'm not sure yet. We'll know tomorrow, Jiang Pengji said. Yuan Gui, you must guard the rear well. Don't let your guard down. Even though there were very few generals under her command who thought they were smart and made decisions on their own, those who were young and famous were always more impetuous. They were eager to perform meritorious deeds, so it was inevitable that they would drop the ball at critical moments. Jiang Pengji had to remind them from time to time to prevent them from being hot-blooded. Generals were a profession where their heads were tied to their waistbands. If their brains weren't good, how long could they live? After a round of discussion, Jiang Pengji closed the streaming room, washed up, and went to bed. She needed to rejuvenate herself. There would be a big battle the next day. At the same time, the troops led by Feng Zhu were resting at a place dozens of miles away. The scouts sent out had also gotten a clear understanding of the situation at the front lines. Knowing that the decisive battle between his lord and Jiang Pengji had yet to begin, Feng Zhu heaved a long sigh of relief. He had finally made it in time. A general hesitantly asked Feng Zhu, military counselor, should we rush over to meet up with our lord tonight, or? Feng Zhu shook his head and said thoughtfully, if we rush over tonight, most of our troops will be exhausted. They won't have much combat power left. How can we help our lord tomorrow? It's better to let the army rest for a while. When the two armies face off tomorrow, you and I will lead the troops to launch a sneak attack from behind while Lu Shi is lax. We'll take her by surprise and attack her when she's unprepared. This will definitely cause Lu Shi to panic. In this way, the pressure on our lord's side will be reduced. Feng Zhu withdrew his troops from the front lines. In order to confuse Qiguanrang, he specially led his troops to take a detour to mislead Qiguanrang, making him think that he was not rushing to the front lines but had sent his troops back to reinforce Haozhou. In other words, Jiang Pengji did not know that Feng Zhu's troops had already arrived. In this way, Jiang Pengji would be defenseless when Feng Zhu launched a sneak attack from behind tomorrow. How could they know that Jiang Pengji was different from them? She had long noticed Feng Zhu's actions. The next day, the sky was dimly lit, and the morning sun shone faintly. The troops of the two armies confronted each other in the cold wind. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the battlefield was filled with a somber atmosphere. The banners with the word Lu or Huang written on them fluttered in the wind, making a loud sound. The swords and spears flashed with cold light, reflecting the resolute faces of their owners. The morale of the troops was twisted into a ball. The murderous aura of the military formation filled the sky, and even the air was cold. Under such an atmosphere, the salted fish in the streaming room did not dare to joke. Jiang Pengji was dressed in red clothes and silver armor. Her red tassel helmet covered most of her face, but it could not hide the undercurrent that surged in her eyes. Behind her, the troops wore bright armor and were in high spirits. Their morale had reached its peak. In the face of such a lineup, it was impossible for Huang Song's side to not feel pressured. However, he had no way out. Huang Song closed his eyes and opened them again. His eyes were calm. If it was in the past, fighting a war had to follow procedures. Nowadays, it was more and more casual. Fighting a war was fighting a war. Huang Song was not foolish enough to suggest a battle between generals. He knew that Jiang Pengji's martial strength alone was enough to challenge everyone, regardless of whether it was one-on-one, or a group fight. Under such circumstances, the troops of the two sides seemed to have no other activities other than fighting. They could not possibly let more than 200,000 people watch their lord chat in front of the battlefield, could they? Beat the drums. At the command, the drummers pushed out hundreds of war chariots with big cowhide drums. Dong! 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 The sound of the war drums boosted the morale of the whole army. Jiang Pengji also raised her hand and waved, indicating that the war drums could begin. The military formation stretched for several miles. The two armies added up to more than 200,000 troops and horses. They had to rely on this method to transmit all kinds of information. The beating of the drums was not only to boost morale, but also to inform the troops. everyone perked up. Those who were absent-minded came back to their senses. Those who were sleepy woke up. The big battle was about to begin. Jiang Pengji was the commander-in-chief for this battle. Although Luo Yue was capable, he had been squatting in the rear to deal with security and border defense all year round. He did not have much actual experience in commanding troops. Regarding this, Luo Yue was not the least bit unwilling. If the Lord commanded the troops, it meant that she could not act recklessly. Qin Gong and the others rubbed their palms together. Every one of them was in high spirits. Without waiting for Jiang Pengji to give the order, the enemy troops could not hold back anymore. Shouts of "kill" resounded through the sky, causing pain in one's ears. The soldiers who carried the flags waved the flags. It was as if black clouds were floating in the sky. The soldiers who beat the drums worked even harder. Because they used all their strength to beat the drums, the muscles on their arms tightened. One arm was as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. Their oily sweat soaked their skin until it glistened. Jiang Pengji smiled, drew her sword, and gave the order. Chapter 1331. The cavalry played a pivotal role on the battlefield. Without large-scale popularization or further development of firearms, the myth of the cavalry was almost unbreakable. It was not that the cavalry could not be dealt with, but the price paid was far greater than the gains. This was also the horror of the cavalry. The cavalry was extremely mobile. Whether it was a joint attack or a roundabout retreat, how could the two-legged people outrun the four-legged horses? Their ability to collide and kill was also one of the cornerstones of the cavalry myth. In addition, ancient wars were very dependent on military formations, which could be integrated into a whole, thus achieving a sublimation from quantitative change to qualitative change. Not only could the cavalry collide and cut the military formation, but it could also prevent the enemy from being able to form an effective defense or attack. Jiang Pengji's cavalry not only consisted of light cavalry, but also heavy cavalry that had defeated the northern borderline. One light cavalry and one heavy cavalry cooperated with each other. Whether it was an attack or something else, the effect was naturally stronger than that of a single unit. Huang Song attached so much importance to her that he naturally knew this. In order to deal with this terrifying cavalry battalion, he discussed with everyone for a long time and finally came up with a way to slightly restrain them. They adopted a more flexible and changeable military formation. At the same time, they avoided the sharp edge and lured the enemy into the formation, then strangled them. The cavalry that ran were wolves and tigers. The cavalry that fell into the swamp of the sea of people were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Their ability was limited. In order not to let the enemy discover that there was something fishy about the military formation, Huang Song and the others also made some changes to the vanguard. This method was no problem for ordinary people, but for Jiang Pengji, it was superfluous. Not to mention her own spiritual ability, even the high-altitude camera in the streaming room could overlook the situation from a certain angle. She keenly discovered the characteristics of Huang Song's military formation and gave another order. The messenger received the order and immediately sent the message out. The rhythm of the bugle horn and military drums suddenly changed. At that moment, the heavy cavalry had already resisted the tide-like rain of arrows and was less than 100 feet away from the enemy's front line. Such a short distance was just a blink of an eye for the warhorses that were running at full speed. The soldiers on horseback heard the order to change. They pulled the reins tightly to direct the warhorses to change direction while they raised their thick shields and smashed the charging enemy heavily. The enemy used a joint attack technique to stab the warhorses under the cavalry. Even though the warhorses were wearing thick armor, they still neighed in pain. The heavy cavalry under Jiang Pengji burned a lot of money. The weight of the men and horses could be called human-shaped tanks. Along the way, it was the most violent and powerful suppression. That kind of strength was not something that an ordinary body of flesh and blood could withstand. They broke through in an instant, but they didn't go straight in. Instead, they charged towards the flanks of the enemy in a wide arc. It was even simpler for the light cavalry. After receiving the order, they immediately split into several groups and circled around to the enemy's flanks. From the looks of it, the cavalry is afraid. The soldiers under Huang Song's tent did not know what was going on. Only Huang Song and his men, who had been paying close attention to the battlefield, were shocked. The cavalry wasn't scared. They knew that there was a trap in front of them, so they didn't want to make unnecessary sacrifices. Instead, they decided to attack the two flanks where the defense was weaker. When Qingjing thought of this possibility, he secretly clenched his fists. At the same time, he was in disbelief. His opponent's reaction was too fast. Compared to Qingjing's calmness, Huang Song's reaction was much more obvious. Huang Song murmured, "Lanting, oh Lanting, you're really my nemesis." Even though his heart was heavy, Huang Song did not reveal a dejected expression. He was the lord. If he panicked, what would happen to his subordinates? Because the cavalry didn't really affect the enemy's main force, when the two armies collided, the situation of the battle could be said to be tragic. Jiang Pengji looked at the situation on the battlefield. She suppressed the urge to join the battle. Instead, she calmly commanded the dispatches and reinforcements. Watching from afar, Han Yu couldn't help but sigh. My lord really has the demeanor of a brave general. Yang Si added, my lord also has the wisdom of a strategist. Fortunately, there was only one lord like this. If there were a few more, wouldn't the strategists and generals lose their jobs and be laid off? At the same time, Wei Si had a solemn look on his face. He knew that the balance of the battlefield was slowly tilting towards his lord. However, Feng Zhu, who was under Huang Song's tent, still hadn't appeared. This made him a little worried for no reason. Wei Si would not underestimate anyone who had lived in troubled times. After all, Feng Zhu was an important minister who had once assisted His Majesty. While he was deep in thought, the front line was already in a mess. Not long after, there were corpses lying on the ground. The battle cries of the two sides not only resounded in the sky, but even the gravel on the ground trembled slightly. Luo Yu was in charge of the left wing, Qin Gong was the vanguard, and the right wing was led by Jiang Nongqin, who was newly promoted. Both sides infiltrated each other and fought each other. If not for the difference in clothes, they really wouldn't be able to tell who was the enemy. Someone had just killed the enemy with one foot, and then his body was pierced through by the enemy's weapon. Yang Si seemed very calm, but his eyes kept drifting in a certain direction. In fact, even if he sat on horseback, this altitude was not enough to cross over the wall of people, but he could not help but want to see. It didn't matter in the past, but after clarifying his intentions, he felt that there was nothing more torturous than the combination of civil and military. What was a general? It was a precarious profession, and the battlefield was so chaotic that even immortals could be accidentally injured. Sigh, how worrisome. Han Yu rolled his eyes, glanced at him, and asked, what are you worried about? The situation is favorable to our army. What are you worried about? Yang Si said, you don't understand. This is concern. Han Yu sneered, my son, Han Run, has been studying at the Golden Scale Academy for a long time. A single man who didn't even have a wife mocked him for not knowing how to care for his wife and daughter. Who gave him the courage? Yang Si, perhaps, it was the Lord? Han Yu didn't have much contact with Jiang Nongqin, but he knew that she was unusually quiet. Although she was a woman, she was no less than an ordinary general. To be honest, in his opinion, Yang Si was a rotten piece of wood, and he really couldn't afford to be associated with her. If Yang Si knew about this, he would definitely explode in anger and draw his sword to hack Han Yu. Jiang Nongqin was leading the right wing to deal with the enemy. Because of her prestige in the army over the years, the generals under the Lord's command didn't dare to look down on her, not to mention those ordinary generals who had been promoted. No one dared to protest or question her orders, so the situation on the right wing was relatively stable, and it was difficult for the enemy to expand their victory. On the one hand, she cooperated with the middle army to contain the enemy, and on the other hand, she joined forces with the Middle Army to make the enemy suffer. Looking at her like this, who wouldn't give her a thumbs up? They were not convinced by women, except for two exceptions. One was the unfathomable lord, and the other was the dignified Captain Jiang. Although Jiang Nongqin was an old woman, there were many people who secretly liked her, but they just didn't have the guts to say it out. Captain Jiang, there is a change in the rear. Chapter 1332. The battle at the front was in full swing, and Xie was so bored that he was almost moldy. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Even if there was nothing wrong, Xie still had to be alert and be extremely vigilant. Have the scouts we send out returned? Xie paid attention to the battle situation at the front and ordered the soldiers to be ready for battle. Reporting to General, there is no news yet. The deputy general pressed the sword at his waist with his left hand and looked at the front solemnly. He asked Xie in a low voice, "General, why did the Lord send the general? Huang Song's troops are not as good as ours. He has already used up all his troops. How could he have the strength to launch a sneak attack?" For a general, there was no future without military merits. How did military merits come about? Naturally, they were piled up with the enemy's heads. Hiding in the safer rear, they didn't even see the shadow of the enemy. Wasn't this a waste of time? Their lord's future was getting brighter and brighter. Once Huang Song was destroyed, she would be the ruler of all of Dongqing. It was a small peak of her life. They didn't know what the future would be. Did the Lord want to establish a stable country or continue to expand? If it was the latter, it would be best. If it was the former, one less battle meant one less chance to be promoted. When the world was at peace, it would not be so easy for a general to be promoted. This time, being sent to the rear was equivalent to being on a cold bench. The deputy general who assisted Xie was naturally worried. This is the Lord's order. We will follow it. She must have a reason for this arrangement. Let everyone be alert so that the enemy doesn't take advantage of any loopholes. Compared to the deputy general's worry, Xie was calm. He raised his hand and took out a handkerchief from his armor to wipe the shiny shaft. He lowered his eyes and said, "If there is any trouble at the rear, the Lord will punish us. Neither you nor I can afford to bear the consequences." The deputy general thought of his lord's temper and suddenly sweated profusely. Of all the people he questioned the Lord's orders? "I will do it now." The deputy general immediately left. Xie recalled the deputy general's words and frowned slightly. Although he was not the Lord's diehard fan, the Lord made decisions like a god and rarely made mistakes. The Lord said that the enemy might launch a sneak attack at the rear, so this news was most likely true. The only problem was, when would the enemy appear? The rear was too comfortable and the soldiers were more or less relaxed. This was not a good sign. Xie could only send someone to constantly remind the soldiers in his tent not to be careless. Report. Just as the deputy general was about to report to Xie, he heard a shout in his ear. What happened? The person said, "We found a bloodied warhorse just now." The deputy general was shocked and quickly said, "Let's go and take a look." It was a maroon warhorse. Its body was not as tall and strong as the heavy cavalry warhorses. It had a tubular body, a narrow chest, a long back, and shallow ribs. Although its back was narrow, it was strong and powerful. Its muscles were more developed than ordinary warhorses, and its fur was glossy. Those who were familiar with the breed of warhorses could tell at a glance that this horse was from the northern borderline and definitely had the bloodline of the Fergana horse of Shaolin. It was fast, had great endurance, and came and went like the wind. Of course, this kind of horse was also specially allocated to scouts to ensure their mobility so that they could escape as soon as they discovered the enemy. The deputy general looked at the warhorse with a heavy expression. He raised his hand and touched the bloodstain. With a slight sniff, he knew that it was human blood and not horse blood. The soldier said, "Deputy General, this warhorse's abdomen is slightly injured. The deputy general looked in the direction that the soldier was pointing and saw a palm-long wound on the side of the horse's abdomen. Some of the blood had already coagulated. With his many years of experience, he could tell at a glance what kind of sharp weapon had caused the wound. The horse is back. Where is the person? The deputy general asked. The soldier replied, I didn't find him. When the horse came back, I didn't see anyone. The deputy general's heart sank. He vaguely guessed that the scout had died. He asked again, other than this horse, did any other horses come back? The soldier shook his head. The deputy general quickly passed the news to Siaze. The mission of this batch of scouts was not to investigate the front but the rear. Now they had been killed. If not for the fact that the horse knew the way and ran back with injuries, they probably wouldn't have found it. It could be seen that the Lord's guess was correct. There was indeed an enemy force hiding in the dark. Hearing the deputy general's words, Siaze's brows furrowed, leaving faint wrinkles between his brows. Order the entire army to be on guard. He knew very well what kind of equipment his scouts were equipped with. Almost all of them were equipped with good horses that had both speed and endurance. Under such circumstances, they were still killed by the enemy. It could be seen that the enemy was not easy to deal with. If the warhorse hadn't come back on its own, Siaze wouldn't have known that the enemy had appeared. Not long after he issued the order, there was a rumbling sound from behind. The ground shook even more violently. Kill, accompanied by thunderous shouts, a dense horde of enemies quickly appeared in their field of vision. The deputy general's warhorse was startled. He was shocked by the number of enemies. He called out to Siaze loudly, General, the enemy is here. Siaze glanced at them and his face darkened. The enemy was less than 3 miles away. How did they do it so close? If the Lord hadn't warned them, the enemy would have launched a sneak attack and the army would have suffered heavy losses. What are you panicking for? Get into formation. Siaze shouted, as if he knew what was going on. 3 miles was nothing to the enemy cavalry. These cavalry were not easy to deal with. They were very skilled with their bows and arrows. Before they even got close, the arrows had already fallen. Siaze was calm. On one hand, he commanded the soldiers to block the arrows with the shield wall. On the other hand, he ordered the archers to shoot at the enemy under the protection of the shield wall. He tried to clear out the nearest wave of enemies. However, the distance between the two sides was too short. The archers couldn't shoot more than a few rounds. The enemy cavalry opened the way, and the troops behind them followed closely. There were tens of thousands of them. Seeing that the enemy cavalry was close, Siaze ordered the soldiers to line up with spears more than 10 feet long. They stabbed the enemy's warhorse's sternum, abdomen, and eyes. However, the mobility of the cavalry was a headache for all troops. The spears could only hinder them for a while. Jiang Pengji was the first to notice the unusual movements in the rear, but she didn't show it. Instead, she focused on the situation at the front. In order to deal with the sneak attack, she gave Siaze a lot of manpower. Not only was Siaze's military ability questionable, but the quality of his own troops were also questionable. When the news of the sneak attack came, everyone was shocked. Only Jiang Pengji was calm as usual. She said, "Believe in Yuan Gui." She had given the enemy a warning, which was equivalent to cheating. Jiang Pengji would definitely beat him up. Inexplicably, Siaze's little universe, desire, erupted. The enemy troops who launched the sneak attack were not bystanders. They were the people Feng Zhu had brought from the front lines of Wanzhou. Chapter 1333. Military Advisor. This, Feng Zhu said in a hoarse voice, Lu Shi is indeed a terrifying person. He rarely admired anyone, but Jiang Pengji, who had made his plans fail time and time again, was definitely one of them. Those who guarded the rear under such circumstances were either people who were cautious and cowardly, or people who had foresight. Jiang Pengji could not be the former, so it could only be the latter. She had long guessed that Feng Zhu would lead the troops to attack the rear. What should we do now? The general looked anxious. His tough and rugged face was full of worry, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. What should we do? Feng Zhu said, "There's no turning back. Of course, we fight." Should he order the army to retreat because the enemy was on guard? The general looked embarrassed, as if he had realized that he had asked a stupid question. Little did he know that Feng Zhu was in a difficult position. The troops he led to attack Jiang Pengji's rear and coordinate with the front line would more or less boost the morale of Huang Song's main force. If he withdrew his troops to avoid the enemy's vanguard, the morale of the front line would inevitably collapse, and they would be like stray dogs. Therefore, even if he had to fight to the death, he could not take a step back. The matter of Jiang Pengji's rear being attacked was not only heard by Jiang Pengji and the others, but also by Huang Song, who was overseeing the army in the middle. After thinking about it, Huang Song still could not guess the identity of the person until Qing Jing's words woke him up. "Lord, that must be Huaijie's troops." Qing Jing counted the time with his fingers. The unfamiliar troops that attacked Jiang Pengji's rear must have been led by Feng Zhu. There was no one else but him. Huang Song was delighted. He quickly ordered his men to continue beating the drums to boost the morale of the soldiers. The drumbeats fell like a rainstorm. Before Jiang Pengji could move, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a bullet screen. Her fingers trembled, and her perfect expression almost revealed a flaw. Xiankatianxia, beating the drums on the battlefield. This is the same principle as playing dynamic music on a sports bike. Is it to stimulate the adrenaline? Tudu Feichio, to the previous poster, "You're so naughty. How do you expect me to look directly at the background music of a sports bike?" War drums indeed had the effect of stimulating morale, but it had another important meaning, which was to convey orders and warnings. Soldiers fighting was not like TV dramas. Everyone knew martial arts, and fighting was as fancy as dancing. They only knew the simplest movements. Without martial arts, they were not afraid. With so many of them working together to attack at the same time, their lethality was not weaker than that of a martial arts master. According to the different drum beats, they attacked together, defended together, and chased after the enemy together. After all, this was an era without mobile phones, wireless Bluetooth, or even electronic loudspeakers. Huang Song gave the order to attack, and the drummers increased their tempo and frequency, oppressing the enemy with their momentum. If they could break through the enemy's line of defense in one go and inflict heavy casualties on the enemy, the morale of the soldiers would continue to rise. The soldiers under Jiang Pengji's command also noticed the changes in the rear. The frontline soldiers were timid for a moment. Before they could react, the enemy had already pounced on them like wolves and tigers. Perhaps the injuries on his body were not fatal, but the enemy's stomp was enough to turn him into a bloody pulp. Seeing the situation, Jiang Pengji immediately changed her tactics and adopted a defensive formation to defend against the enemy. The morale on Huang Song's side was not stable. As long as Feng Zhu's army could not break through the rear, and the frontline soldiers could not defeat the enemy, the morale of Huang Song's army would definitely plummet over time. When the time came, Jiang Pengji would give the order to switch from defense to offense and destroy the enemy's psychological defense in one fell swoop. She was calm and unhurried, issuing military orders one after another. Sure enough, Huang Song's side could not gain any advantage. On the other side, Xie Zhe's side had also stabilized the situation. Not only did he not allow the enemy to advance any further, but he also forced them to retreat a little. Today's battle is of utmost importance. Xie Zhe shouted loudly. "I will live and die with you all." As he spoke, he took the lead and killed 2 enemies. The surrounding soldiers were greatly encouraged. Xie Zhe's martial arts skills were comparable to Li Yun's. Both of them gave it their all, but the odds of winning were 50-50. The long spear in his hand was like a part of his body. Under his control, a silver dragon-like light flashed in the air, piercing through flesh like lightning, taking away a few lives in an instant. After killing a few people, Xie gave several more orders in succession. The two sides were in a stalemate. It seemed that they were evenly matched, but Feng Ju knew very well that as time went on, he would be the one who would lose. The army had set off from the front line of Wanzhou. Even though they had rested and reorganized halfway, the soldiers' bodies and spirits had not fully recovered. The enemy was different. Feng Ju was thinking of countermeasures, but how could the battlefield be controlled by the wisdom of one or two people? Jiang Pengji observed the situation and suddenly said, Bogeo is about to lose. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, she did not have much of an advantage. Even if Huang Song was going to lose, it was impossible for him to lose so quickly. At the same time, Yang Si crossed his arms, twirled his neatly trimmed beard, and said, Huang Song's momentum is lost. Han Yu nodded. Why were the three of them so sure? Because they had all heard that there was a problem with the rhythm of the enemy's drums. The pitch, rhythm, and density of the drum beats all represented different meanings. Beating the drums to advance the troops, and stopping when the drums sounded. The enemy's drumbeats were clearly for an attack, but the enemy had the intention to retreat. This was a clear sign that their morale had plummeted. Apart from that, the drummers' morale was low and they were distracted, so much so that the war drums made a few mistakes. This was fatal on the battlefield. Jiang Pengji saw that the timing was just right. She struck while the iron was hot and gave the order to attack. For a moment, the army pounced on the enemy like a dam that had been opened. The war drums also became louder and more intense. With one side rising and the other falling, Huang Song's troops were even more disadvantaged. Huang Song's face was livid. He clenched his molars tightly, and the blue veins on his forehead bulged. At that moment, a general who was covered in blood rushed over on horseback. He had suffered serious injuries and almost fell off when he dismounted. My lord, our front line has fallen. Huang Song closed his eyes tightly and said through gritted teeth, retreat. Retreat. As soon as the order to retreat was issued, the soldiers who heard it hurriedly turned around and retreated. All of them only wanted to escape, which made it easy for the enemy who was chasing after them. Jiang Pengji's side pressed on with a spurt of energy and pursued the enemy. The number of corpses left behind by the enemy's retreat was almost equal to the previous losses. The front line won a great victory. Feng Ju, who was in the rear, was also affected and quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. Jiang Pengji's gaze was distant. Her left hand gently stroked the hilt of the god-slaying saber at her waist. After a while, she said, summon Captain Jiang. Mobilize 5,000 troops and horses and follow me. When Yang Si heard this, his nerves tightened with a clang. Han Yu was a little slow to react. His lord was going to, my lord, don't chase a cornered enemy. Yang Si widened his eyes and squeezed out the words that even he himself did not believe. Take advantage of their weakness and kill them. Jiang Pengji sneered. I only know how to beat a drowning enemy. When Jiang Nongqin received the news, she mobilized 5,000 elite cavalrymen without hesitation. No matter whether the Lord's orders were right or wrong, they were golden rules to her. Chapter 1334. They thought they could finally be at ease. Who knew that their lord was such a worrisome person? Han Yu said, are we short of 5,000 soldiers and horses? Why don't we bring more? If it were not forbidden, Han Yu really wanted to bring all the troops to ensure his lord's safety. Jiang Pengji said, why do we need so many people? If 5,000 soldiers can't take down Bogeo, why should I keep them and waste our food? If 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers could not take down the defeated soldiers who had lost their morale and were like stray dogs, Jiang Pengji really wanted to scold them as useless snacks. Although her words were harsh, no one could refute what Jiang Pengji said because she had the right to say so. Nongqin, let's go. Jiang Pengji waved her horsewhip. Little White took the lead and rushed out. Jiang Nomqin rode her horse and followed closely behind. 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers followed. Looking at his lord's back, Yang Si almost suffocated. He raised his hand and kept rubbing his left chest. With such a lord, his life would be shortened. Han Yu's face darkened. He caught a glimpse of Yang Si's action and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't I know you were ill?" Yang Si said, "Since I followed such a lord, I'm worried that I'll fall ill." Han Yu was strangely silent for a few seconds. He could understand what Yang Si meant and felt the same way. Without comparison, there would be no harm. He thought of his former lord, Su Bei. Although he was not as versatile as his lord, at least he was less worrisome. The two of them did not have time to chat. Although Huang Song's side had retreated in defeat, they had not dealt with the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind. Although Xie Zhe did not have a strong desire for fame and fortune, as a military general, who would dislike having too much glory bestowed upon him, Xie Zhe was no exception. If they could completely defeat the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind, it would be a great achievement. Feng Ju saw that the situation was hopeless and began to retreat in an orderly manner. However, the soldiers had lost their morale. One by one, they were like headless flies, throwing away their armor and running for their lives. The negative emotions were contagious. First, it affected a group of people, then it spread to thousands of people. Feng Ju saw this and his face turned ashen. He almost fell off the horse. Fortunately, he was supported by someone. Otherwise, he would have been injured or killed if he had fallen from such a high horse in such a chaotic situation. "Military advisor, this general will escort you out of here." Feng Ju woke up from the discomfort of the spinning world. His lips were dry and peeled, and he looked particularly haggard. "You don't have to worry about me. It's more important to gather the troops and retreat. As long as the green hills last, one need not worry about firewood. If they missed the best opportunity, they would be completely annihilated." Just as they were talking, a deafening battle cry came from behind them. Even though they had been fighting for several hours and the soldiers were exhausted, the enemies in front of them were all meritorious. With meritorious service, they would be able to earn high rewards. No matter how tired their bodies were, their minds were still active and excited. "Oh no, military advisor, the enemy is here." As they fled, the number of soldiers around them grew fewer and fewer. The soldiers who were left behind were either hacked to death or captured alive. General left the battlefield with nearly 1,000 of his trusted subordinates and Feng Ju, but Xie Zhe seemed to have eaten a weight and was determined to chase after them. After a round of pursuit and encirclement, there were only 100 or 200 soldiers left. Most of them were injured and had almost no combat power left. The enemy was still following closely behind. The night was getting darker and darker. A cold wind blew, bringing with it the strong smell of blood. It was so strong that it was nauseating. The battle cry was so faint that it seemed to be drifting from the horizon. Feng Ju stared at the enemy soldiers who surrounded them with a fierce look. Xie Zhe was riding a tall horse. The two sides were more than 10 feet apart. The soldiers surrounded them and tied their hands behind their backs. They even put swords to their necks. Xie Zhe glanced around and was satisfied. He raised his hand and waved. "Take all of them back and wait for my lord to deal with them." Feng Ju tried to struggle, but the soldiers who restrained him were so strong that he couldn't move at all. There were different levels of captives. The soldiers who sold their physical strength were at the bottom of the pyramid. The value they produced was not enough for them to eat. Feng Ju belonged to the top of the pyramid. Xie Zhe wanted to bring rare talents to his lord, regardless of whether they could pledge allegiance to her or not. To prevent Feng Ju from having thoughts of suicide, he even sent people to watch over him. Feng Ju snorted sarcastically. At the same time, Jiang Pengji led 5,000 troops to chase after Huang Song. Although it was said to be a chase, it was actually a slaughter. Many enemy soldiers tried to stop them, but they died under the horses' hooves. Their corpses were trampled into minced meat. Wherever the cavalry passed, piles of corpses were left. The darkness of the night was a good cover, but it didn't pose any obstacle to Jiang Pengji. Therefore, the time she took to catch up with Huang Song was much shorter than what he had expected. Facing 5,000 light and heavy cavalry, Huang Song only felt calm. Instead, he felt like, it's finally here. Originally, there were 30,000 to 50,000 remaining soldiers to cover his escape, but the soldiers were already scared out of their wits by the enemy. How could they still have the will to fight? Under the onslaught of the enemy's pursuers, some fled, some got lost, and some fell apart. When Huang Song was besieged, there were less than 3,000 soldiers around him. 3,000 crippled soldiers against 5,000 elite cavalrymen. The result was obvious. This could be considered a one-sided slaughter. When Huang Song and the others were captured, the outcome was finally decided. Jiang Pengji swung the blood-stained god-slaying knife in her hand. The blood left a long mark on the ground. She called out loudly, "Is that Bogeo in front?" Hearing how Jiang Pengji addressed him, Huang Song, who was in dire straits, laughed bitterly. "Lanting, are you still willing to call me that? In this chaotic world, you and I have no choice." "But business is business, personal is personal," Jiang Pengji said. "Don't you still call me Lanting?" "Yes. I have no choice." Huang Song looked dispirited. "But business is business. Lanting, have you thought about how to deal with me?" Jiang Pengji didn't say it explicitly. It wasn't a good place to talk about it. She said faintly, "I'm not a heartless person who kills indiscriminately. Back then, I chose this path because the situation forced me to. People weren't ambitious from the beginning." Huang Song was no different. Before the destruction of Dongqing, his ambition was to be an honest and capable official. He wanted to change the prejudice of others and bring prosperity to the country. However, this hotbed of troubled times gave him unprecedented ambition. Now that he had fallen from the peak to the bottom, he had to bow down to his former opponent. Most importantly, after submitting, he would be suspected for the rest of his life. Who would be willing to live such a life? Huang Song had considered the worst-case scenario. He would kill himself to protect his wife and children. But, every time he thought of what his wife, Chi Chaolan, said that day, the courage to kill himself receded like the tide. He said, "Lanting, you've really given me a difficult problem." Chapter 1335. The night breeze blew, adding to the indescribable loneliness. Huang Song was silent for a long time, as if he was considering the truth of Jiang Pengji's words. "It's getting late. If we don't go back soon, I'm afraid Zixiao and the rest will get sick from anxiety." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and said to Jiang Nongqin, "Bogeo is my close friend. His status is not comparable to that of an ordinary person. Instruct your subordinates to be careful and not to neglect the distinguished guest." Jiang Nongqin had no objections. She accepted the order and said, "I will obey your orders." Although Huang Song was a captive, Jiang Pengji did not have any intention to kill him. Naturally, she would not deliberately humiliate him. If he was sensible, why not spare his life? If he would rather break than bend, she could only kill him. She and Huang Song were indeed friends, but feelings were a supplement and not a necessity for her. If she had to give it up, she would not be sentimental. Huang Song did not say anything, but he did not resist either. He tacitly agreed to Jiang Pengji's arrangements. Compared to his calmness and indifference, the reactions of the others were more intense. Some cried hysterically, some were like dead water, and all their hopes were dashed. Some were trembling with fear. When the soldiers wanted to tie him up with ropes, his body shook like a sieve. Despair shrouded them like dark clouds. No one knew where their future lay. According to the rules of the past, if the lord of a force was defeated and captured, most of the officials under her would not have a good ending. Some could still jump ship and change bosses. Some would forever be suspected and suppressed because they had a close relationship with their old masters. They would be depressed for the rest of their lives. Jiang Pengji did not think so much. She only knew that the battle between her and Huang Song had finally come to an end. All that was left was to deal with the aftermath and recover Haozhou. It would not take much time. After thinking about it carefully, she felt that the pressure on her shoulders had lightened. She even had the leisure to chat and laugh with Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Nongqin did not dare to keep pace with her lord. She maintained a respectful posture. Even when riding a horse, she lagged behind her by half a horse's body. Jiang Pengji said, "You have made such a great contribution this time. What do you want, Nongqin?" Jiang Nongqin said without hesitation, "It's my honor to go through fire and water for you, my lord. How can I claim credit and ask for rewards?" It was reasonable for her to give up her life for the Lord. Jiang Nongqin did not lack anything. The Lord had given her a chance to perform meritorious deeds, which was already considered a gift. Jiang Pengji sighed. "I know you are loyal to me, but you have to think about yourself." Jiang Nongqin said matter-of-factly, "I'm very good." She felt that her current life couldn't be any better. Her lord had given her a second life and allowed her to live a life that she had never dared to imagine before. Occasionally, when she thought back to the past, she was a little surprised. Was the me before the age of 13 really her? She grew faster than her peers and had a bigger appetite. Because of this, her parents treated her harshly and scolded her. Her grandmother regarded her as a jinx and repeatedly bullied her. At the worst, she broke a pole that was as thick as an arm. After that, her so-called relatives sold her to a broker in exchange for a meager amount of money. He entered the Lu residence by chance, but because he looked more mature, he was humiliated by the steward's son. She had long been ready to die. The Lord had given her the meaning and courage to live, allowing her to enter a level that most people in the world could not reach. In her heart, the lowly servant Ah Zhu had long died. The one who survived was the Lord's Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Pengji was very stingy with her feelings, but Jiang Nongqin was one of the special cases. "I heard that you and Jing Rong," Jiang Pengji was not a professional iceman, but every pair of mandarin ducks that had been brought together by her was a model couple. Jiang Nongqin's expression was calm. Not a trace of shyness could be seen. She was calm as if she was talking about the weather. "What's wrong with military advisor Yang? I remember that Nongqin is only a year and a few months older than me." Jiang Pengji said, "The war will stop for a while. Don't you want to take advantage of the gap to settle the matter between you and Jing Rong? His peers have given birth to a few children, but he is still alone." Jiang Nongqin frowned and her tone was a little unfriendly. Of course, this unfriendly tone was directed at Yang Si. Could it be that military advisor Yang said something in front of the Lord? If not, why would the Lord suddenly urge them to get married? Jiang Pengji said, "No, I just dislike his old age. If the two of you don't hurry up, it will affect the children more or less." Jiang Nongqin said, "Will it?" Jiang Pengji said, "Jing Rong was addicted to alcohol when he was young, and his private lifestyle was tsk, he is old, so it will naturally affect him." Jiang Xiaowei had never doubted the Lord's words. "I will consider this matter carefully." Thinking of the children of the Golden Scale Academy, Jiang Nongqin's mind started to work. They were all the pillars of the Lord's future. Thinking of this, she did not seem to be very resistant to this matter. Jiang Pengji said, "If Nongqin gets married, I will prepare a wedding dowry for you that will definitely not be worse than those of the princes and their grandchildren." Marriage in ancient times was particular about matching families. The economic strength and social status of the man and the woman would not be too far apart. Therefore, the betrothal gifts and dowries of both parties were mostly equal. If one party was more powerful than the other, and the man's betrothal gift was less, others would criticize him for marrying into the family and claiming connections with the in-laws. If the woman's dowry was less, others would also criticize the woman's family for selling their daughter. If Jiang Pengji really wanted to prepare a wedding dowry for Jiang Nongqin, Yang Si would have to empty his family's pockets. Jiang Nongqin revealed a faint smile, her eyes overflowing with happiness. Yang Si was speechless. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Jiang Pengji spent an hour before returning. Everyone was already looking forward to it, their necks stretched out. Hearing the movements of the army returning, they hurriedly went forward. Their first reaction was to look for Jiang Pengji. He looked left and right and saw that his lord was unscathed. Only then did his little heart return to its original place. Jiang Pengji said, Bogeo and the rest entertain them well. Everything will be discussed tomorrow. Yes. Yang Si deliberately lagged a few steps behind so that he could walk side by side with Jiang Nongqin. The latter was frowning, as if she was thinking about a huge problem. Jiang Nongqin said, for the next few days, military advisor Yang should abstain from alcohol and food. You should learn more about health from military advisor Wei. Yang Si asked. Why? He did not know what Jiang Nongqin's temperament was like in the past, but after the two of them got to know each other, he realized that this woman was more reticent than anyone else. She rarely spoke so much at once, especially when she was concerned about his health. He was flattered by the sudden concern. Jiang Nongqin said, Military advisor Yang, do you have any plans for having children? Yang Si said, I haven't thought about it. In the past, he was an unmarried dink. He did not even have a wife, so where would he get a child? Jiang Nongqin said, I hope that he will be a promising successor. If he can't be brought up, it's better to get rid of him early so that he won't tarnish the family's reputation. Yang Si was speechless. With such a mother, the child would have to open his eyes wide and weigh his own worth before reincarnating. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.